All right, good afternoon, everyone. Today is Tuesday, June 4th, 2024. This meeting of the Lake Oswego City Council is now called to order. Ms. Linder, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Buck.
Here.
Councilor Raff is excused. Councilors Corrigan. Here. Afghan.
Here.
Wendland.
Here.
And Mbu.
Yeah.
And Councilor Burdick is excused.
All right, thank you, Ms. Linder. All right, everyone, will you now please stand and join us in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, this Friday, actually, June 7th, is National Gun Violence Awareness Day, and we are making a proclamation to that effect, but we have some community members with us today to speak to the occasion. Please come on forward. We have, Kara, you're doing all the talking.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, okay. Kara Chen with Students Demand Action. Kara is also a member of the Youth Leadership Council and someone who is about to graduate. We understand in a matter of hours? Hours? Are we counting down the hours?
One more day of finals tomorrow, and then we graduate on Friday. So exciting.
Congratulations.
And you're off to?
Oh, Columbia University in the city of New York.
Yes.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Pacer Blue. Yeah, so as we know, June 7th is Gun Violence Awareness Day, and the reason why this is important to me, and I'm sure to many of our community members also, is that in the past years, we've all seen the impact of gun violence, not just in the epicenters in which, for example, a mass shooting may happen, but also in our daily lives when our students go through lockdown drills because of the possibility of a shooting threat at our schools, or when a loved one or someone we know dies from suicide by firearm. That is also considered gun violence. And so all of these forms of gun violence are present in our community, whether we see it on a daily basis or not, and it affects our community members very deeply. And gun violence is often preventable. When we talk about things like gun suicide, oftentimes there are things called ERPOs, or extreme risk protection orders, that courts can issue to temporarily remove the firearm from the possession of a person who may use it to harm themselves or others. And so all of these common sense gun measures are currently being considered on national, state, and local levels. And the reason why I'm bringing this to your attention is because of the fact that next year will be a long session in the Oregon State Legislature. And also because of the fact that on a local level, we can do a lot for upstream prevention. So when we talk about violence prevention, oftentimes there's upstream prevention and downstream prevention. Upstream prevention are things like ERPOs and are things like good mental health care facilities, good mental health care in schools, and especially a strong sense of community. And I believe that LO has been performing this section of prevention very well. There's also obviously downstream prevention, which includes things like shelters and responses and law enforcement responses potentially to gun violence, and also things like how we treat our kids when we talk about gun violence and how we expose them to this fact of the world. And so the reason why this is important for the next session is because several community members, such as me, are going to talk to Senator Solman and Senator Przanski about potentially bringing up a Disarm Hate bill next year. So Disarm Hate is essentially a bill that exists in some other states already, and it would essentially prohibit people who have been previously convicted of violent hate crimes from purchasing and possessing firearms. And so this, I believe, would be a major step in reducing hate-based violence in our state overall. And the reason that I got into the gun violence prevention movement personally was because of the shooting in Atlanta on March 16th, 2021, in which a gunman entered a spa in Atlanta, shot and killed 8 people, and claimed it was because he had a sexual addiction to Asian women. So things like that, things that are based on hate, that are motivated by prejudice, we can prevent these by passing a Disarm Hate bill. and not allowing these people to get weapons of mass destruction, not weapons of mass destruction, those are nuclear bombs, but like weapons of mass violence that they can then use to hurt other people. We should support these common sense gun measures to help prevent gun violence in our communities. So that's in honor of National Gun Violence Prevention Day.
Kara, thank you very much. I don't go down to Salem too much, but I have to say it seems like every time I do, SDA is down there advocating, and you, and I see Sevens here, Debbie and Heather, recognize the two of you as well as parent leaders in this movement, have worked so hard for years. And I see you're speaking here without notes because you speak from the heart. You know this information really well. And as you go forward in 2025, please let me know what I can do to support your these legislative efforts. Thank you for what you're doing on behalf of the community.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you so much. Juneteenth is celebrated this month on June 19th. And this year, the city and our community group, Respond to Racism, with other community partners, we're hosting an event on Sunday, June 16th. This will take place from 11 to 2 p.m. at Millennium Plaza Park. The event program includes a keynote speaker as well as Counselor Mboop, I believe. Music performances, entertainment, food, and artisan vendors. It's always a great time. There's going to be a special remembrance as well for our late community member of the DRC, Bruce Poinsett. That will be taking place at the beginning of the event. It'll be a special moment. So everyone is welcomed and encouraged to attend. There's more information on this event on the city's website and the websites of our partners. We'll be signing the proclamation for this day, and it will be posted along with the Gun Violence Awareness Day to the city's website. Okay. Next on the agenda is the time we have for public comment. Oh, we have some public comment. Dr. Conrad, please come on forward. Good to have you here. Good afternoon. Good evening.
My name is Edward Conrad, and just a brief reassurance to me. I know you're later going to be hearing about stormwater issues, and some of you may have been around long enough to remember 28 years ago the big stormwater problem on the February 20 of 1996. And so I was concerned about something that I know you can't address, but I was concerned about the Lake Oswego Dam, which is judged a significant risk. It's always being evaluated for whether it's a significant risk or a high risk. Significant risk dams are inspected by an engineer every 3 years, and the dam here did just pass. It didn't just pass, it passed fine, but it passed in March. And the only comment that the engineer inspector had was there was some vegetation in some of the concrete cracks. The concrete was fine, everything was fine, but he said, well, you might want to remove that. And I just came from speaking to Mr. Ward, and he said, he'll be on that, so that'll be removed, and we're fine. And I guess that's all I want to say is that as far as that issue of stormwater, and it is a risk, of course, to places like George Rogers or down by the river, but put that out of your mind.
That's good.
Thanks. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you being here. Thank you very much for the comments. Okay, I think that's all we have, public comment? No? Okay. Okay, next we're going to move into the consent agenda. On the consent agenda is item 6.1. This is approval of an intergovernmental agreement with Metro for disaster debris management grant. And item 6.2, which is just approval of meeting minutes from April 16th and May 20th. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
Move to adopt the consent agenda.
All right.
Second.
Motion to adopt the consent agenda made by Councilor Winland and second made by Councilor Corrigan. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Motion, and I see Councilor Mboop affirming there. Motion passes 5-0. Right. Okay, going into council business, first item for consideration is Resolution 24-23. This is a resolution of the council approving the update of the City of Lake Oswego's Emergency Operations Plan. And Assistant City Manager Megan Phelan is going to present this to us.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Good evening. It's nice to be here with you this evening. I am pleased to bring forward to you an updated emergency operations plan. The City of Lake Oswego's Emergency Operations Plan was originally adopted in 1994 and was updated in 1998 2010, and 2017. Staff facilitated an update of the city's EOP as part of an effort to address the 2023 council goal to ensure a safe, secure, and prepared community. This EOP is a component of the city's comprehensive approach to emergency management that ensures that the city is prepared to mitigate the effects of, respond to, and recover from the hazards and threats that pose the greatest risks to the city. While the response to emergency or disaster conditions in order to maximize the safety of the public and minimize property damage is the responsibility of the government, the city recognizes that the overall responsibility for emergency preparedness rests with the community. Our Emergency Management Executive Committee and department stakeholders worked with our consultants to facilitate this EOP update. The new EOP consists of a basic plan that establishes or describes each of these roles and is supported by 18 separate emergency support functions, also called ESFs, that provide specific guidance in their area of focus. So some examples of ESFs include communication, transportation, hazardous materials, etc. The result is a comprehensive update that includes updated terminology, better organization and consolidation of information in the EOP, and the addition of an emergency support function specific to cyber and infrastructure, which is an emerging area for us to be concerned about and watching. Moving forward, staff will continue to review the plan to ensure that it has the latest updates and information and will ensure a comprehensive update in approximately 5 years. I want to thank the city staff that worked with me in reviewing drafts, multiple drafts, providing input. And with that, I am happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Phelan. Anyone have any questions?
Which,
Morgan.
as I was reading through this, it seems like this describes the drill that we went through in January, more or less. It's kind of like, oh, yeah, I remember. Yes, yes, yes. So we've done it recently, and it worked. There you go.
It will definitely provide that framework for how we prepare for and respond to incidences, absolutely.
My question was just how, thank you, it's such a big comprehensive, I know, and it's an effort to update it. How do we, I was curious how we communicate this plan to the community, like what aspects of it are important that we communicate kind of out into the community?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, certainly, I believe the current EOP is available on the city website, so we'll make this update available there as well. And we do have copies of it in our Emergency Operations Center for when we need to utilize the different functions of it. Certainly, we have our Emergency Preparedness Fair coming up in September, and so we could facilitate having a staff table there to talk about or introduce people to the concept of what the EOP is and how we use it to manage and respond to emergencies. And I also believe we do an insert for that particular month related to emergency management as well. Bonnie coordinates that, and she was also very much one of our key partners in reviewing the updates or the drafts to the EOP, and so having communications through that channel would be another option we could look at.
Would someone like to make a motion?
Oh, go ahead.
Councilor Afghan? No? Yes.
I noticed that the cost to complete the EOP is $50,000, and it is absorbed by the city manager office budget, correct?
Correct.
Nice job, thank you.
Wonderful.
I think the city is as ready as we possibly can be, and we continue to train and we continue to do things. I still go back to the, I think the subject that we've talked about most at this council level is community engagement or community knowledge that you're on your own. And I don't want to give a false sense of security to say we're on top of our game plan, and then they don't read the plan to find out that you need to be self-reliant. So that's the, I guess, the council, I mean, I'm fully supportive of this plan. I mean, it's a ton of work and whatever, but it's almost scratching the top of the onion for us to get integrated into the lives of our community. And I'm not sure, I love the part about where you're getting nonprofit groups and school and academic entities and faith-based and community organizations, medical facilities, all kinds of the different people, is there any way to have those people come together as a little mini convention or something that could roll out? We need some big event so that people understand that this is a big deal, because literally thousands of hours of work has gone into this, but it's kind of like, we don't want to put it in the safe and just pull it out when we have a disaster. I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure out the connection to the community part.
Yeah, and what's difficult is the EOP really is a specific operational guide for internal operations and staff.
Right.
But that said, I will be talking with our consultants about the possibility of helping them train up to it. There's a lot of training opportunities that we could explore as part of the adoption of the EOP. In addition, we are working on an exercise this fall called Iron 24, which is, I think, the state exercise on it's revolving around an earthquake response 2 weeks after. So I know Bonnie's been working with the county and being the city liaison on planning what that tabletop exercise will look like, but that's usually our opportunity for us to bring in our partners, Red Cross, school district. We've done other tabletop exercises with them in the past. For example, we facilitated one a couple years ago with the city of West Lynn to envision a wildfire exercise in the Stafford area that could impact both cities. So coordinating with those other partner agencies is how we do it best, is through those tabletop exercises. In terms of the community focus, I think continuing to go to neighborhood meetings, HOA events or meetings as well, and taking every opportunity we can to talk about the importance of the community preparedness and the program we have through our their neighborhood enhancement grant programs for them to purchase supplies and to otherwise be more organized. We're also looking at, Red Cross has published a really good document. They've had it around for a while, but we are going to endeavor to get it out more and about how people can be more prepared in their respective homes. And so that's another document we're going to be using quite a bit and making sure we're handing that out as well.
Okay. I would suggest the Hello LO, if there's, we do the 4-page insert or whatever sometimes, where it's the 1-pager or the something that are essential items. And maybe we could have like a Saturday where we turn all the electricity and the gas and everything off and just say, okay, training day. Just kidding, but to a certain extent.
All ideas are welcome. Honestly, I appreciate the thought.
I'm just trying to figure out, because we did get a lot of comments and a lot of emails this last go-around, and it kind of lit a fire under us when, after you read 30 or 40 of them, to say, oh my gosh, why wasn't Starbucks delivering to my house? Not quite, but it was, I thought there was a lot of questions to say that the expectation level, I think, in the common community member with their level of knowledge about it is kind of like, well, I'm just going to call 911 and people are going to come and help. We have limited staffing and we have limited ability. And while I think we're very well prepared, I just want to make sure that we're trying to figure out, help people become aware to be more reliant. So anyway, and it's a hard thing to do. I'm not saying that it's easy, but I do think we need to have some effort put together as far as common messaging.
Absolutely, and certainly we work really closely too. I should mention Prep LO and the work they're doing, rolling out a new program, relatively new program that replaced a neighborhood program that's still kind of coming out through the state or Office of Emergency Management. They had a meeting at City Hall not too long ago talking with people about how they've become champions of the program and take it back to their respective neighborhoods, HOAs, community groups, whatever networks that they have available to them. So we really appreciate their efforts to working on behalf of the city to really engage and organize the community.
Great, thanks.
Councilor Afghan.
Assistant city manager and I last year went to a couple of homeowner association and neighborhood association. I had this conversation with them. And there is no question that in a disaster, everyone expects the government to be there for them. So what you just said resonates with me. And we had to be brutally honest with them that at this level, our job is to make sure roads are clear, fire engines and the police can get everywhere. And then if the hospital capacities are okay, somebody's going to come and help you. So each neighborhood needs to take care of their own for a while before help can arrive. Those people who are there understand it, but at the city level, I agree with you that we have to figure out how to get that message across crystal clear so people start getting prepared. I think we do need to have a campaign of some sort that gets people's attention. And I know you were joking, but we do this often with road pavement. We're going to shut this down for a day and a half and jokingly, if we started a campaign like one weekend, assume you don't have water, assume you don't have power, assume you don't have sewer, what are you going to do? And start raising the level of awareness. And these type of, I call it being half a shade braver conversations and actions will prepare us for the worst whenever that comes. So what you said resonates with me, but I don't know how we can take this forward so we get our residents' awareness of one level or two levels.
Right.
Thank you.
Good comments. Thank you very much. I thought of one other. I had two quick questions. Does the plan address, as I went through it's a big plan. So I did, full disclosure, I did not read every word of the plan, skimming it. But does it address kind of the welfare, of the team who's working during a crisis event, like what we're doing to care for the people who are caring for everyone else? Is that a part of the plan?
I believe it's part of some of the checklists. It does prompt so each ESF you pull out, there's a checklist on kind of the cover sheet that kind of prompts you to begin starting to think about those things that you need to acquire in advance to the extent you possibly can.
Okay.
I don't think it's in every single one, but depending upon the nature of the incident.
Okay. And so these are all advanced things then that our teams are doing to be prepared and making sure they're being operationally ready. Okay. All right. And then, the other thing we learned from the stormwater thing, like if there was a big disaster, we have these buildings, and other community buildings may be owned by the school district. But then, the people who have access, well, they're not necessarily here. And so if we really had to, it's like, well, how would we get it? I think that was one of the questions is, if we kind of taken that step, in a big disaster, think, well, who are, what's the plan to gain access to buildings and really, when push comes to shove, when we have to kind of all work together, rely on trusted people in the community. I'm not talking about when it's cold for a day, I'm talking like big disaster, we need to be caring for people. I mean, maybe I just hope we continue to have those conversations with other community partners so that we're not just kind of literally locked out of the spaces we've invested in.
Who has the key, in other words?
Who has the key?
Who has the key?
Right.
Do we put it in a hidden pine cone?
Right.
And who knows where the pine cone is?
Right. Chief Johnson's here. He can correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe city facilities have what's called a Knox lock. Knox box. Yeah.
Knox box.
If you're a trained firefighter, you know where to spot them on city
yes.
buildings, but that's where keys are maintained and the fire department have access to that. Certainly with City Hall being also our police department, I of the understanding that they also have key access entry to the facility if needed. However, we do have generator backup power on this facility, so access cards that we currently use to access the building should be operational.
Yeah, okay.
But absolutely, redundancy is always kind of the key in my mind about we can't always assume that we can rely upon one answer to the question. We have to be thinking, if that answer is not available, what's the next best option? And even kind of 2 or 3 steps out from there as well.
Right. That's great. Thank you so much.
But even in the bigger picture, even if we had the top 10 things that you had to have in your house, that was, everybody knows it, and they start buying it over time, I mean, even to have that is something that we I think maybe they're baby steps, but then you build from the baby steps
Simple
up to,
checklist, like,
right?
yeah.
So,
I'll make sure each one of you get a copy of that Red Cross brochure that I was mentioning in your box, in your inbox.
and this is not a knock on the Red Cross, but I think it has to be somewhat community familial oriented instead of just having, because anybody can look up. I think it becomes very, it needs to become very personal, sort of, and it needs to be inviting and as a rah-rah for the community. And I think the Red Cross is fabulous. It's a wonderful organization. But until it becomes part of your sort of community or 1 degree away from you, and that's where a community member, these are the things that we're doing, this is what we're suggesting that you have, even if we have to copy and paste and put our logo on it, or at least get it.
Oswego-ized.
Right.
Oswego-ized.
Right.
So not just water, it should be ionized, pH enhanced.
Right. Period.
Not in a,
We actually were in the process. So just to remind council, 2 years ago, I believe it was, we worked with the chamber to create a business emergency plan, kind of a guide for your business and what you need to do in advance to prepare for your employees. And because we know the sooner businesses can get back up on their feet, the more successful they'll be in an emergency. Using that kind of as our inspiration, we did work towards drafting kind of a resident guide, very similar context about here's some things you should think of or do or prepare in advance, not only having supplies on hand, but how do you shut off your gas? How do you turn off your water if you need to? Those types of things. Really what ended up happening is we created an almost identical document to the Red Cross. And it then became something I was concerned where I didn't want to be coming out with something different than them if we didn't mirror it exactly. And because they already mass produce so many and we get them for free, it seemed a more economical way to go. And they really are the expert in terms of emergency management practices. But we can certainly reevaluate that.
Right. And I know that, yeah. It's just how many people truly have, I mean, part of any product or anything that you're dealing with is how many people have purchased it or used it or acknowledged it exists. And so I would say it's like anything else. You need to be exposed to it, what is it, 10 times before you understand it, or 9? Yeah. So it's almost an overabundance. Because it will happen again, and I think we need to be ready, so.
yeah. Okay, thank you. One, Councilman Boop, last question, and then we're moving on. Did you raise your hand for a question?
No, yeah, I just wanted to talk about, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, no, I just, want to start where Councilor, John finished, ended his remarks. I think this thing is gonna happen. It's gonna happen almost every year. We are living in an era of climate disaster around us everywhere. The question is how our neighborhoods can be enhanced in order to be effective when this will happen. And also how the city itself can always, after the last storm, we should do better than we did this time around, because we did better than we did in 2021. An example that neighborhood association should work with all the businesses that are around. Like in the last storm, on Boone's Bay, almost all the businesses had power. So if there was a coordination with the neighborhoods, people could go charge their phone, warm up. Like at my school, there were power, there were heat. I saw only 3 neighbors come charge their phone, one stayed. I could have made coffee for them, but how would they know that if we coordinate that someone in the neighborhood can talk with the businesses, someone talk with the city, it's sort of an organization that we have to put in place, because this is gonna happen and happen again, and and every time it's worse than the time before. So I'm very happy that the city manager presented this, and it's a huge document, 400 pages. I mean, I I just know that it's very important, and we have to capacitate all our neighbors, everyone, starting from the schools. The best bet is to start in the schools from elementary to high school, and capacitate those kids so that they can go in their neighborhood, be a force when something happens. So I just wanted to throw that away, and thank you, Megan, and all the staff that work on this document. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Boop.
Thank you.
Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 2423?
Move to adopt Resolution 24-23.
Second?
All right, a motion made by Councilor Afghan and seconded by Councilor Corrigan. Is there any discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, hearing none, motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Phelan.
Thank you.
We're now going to move into we have two study sessions this evening, and the first is on proposed code amendments to chapters 52 and 38 of the code as they pertain to stormwater. So joining us, is Sonia Johnson, Associate Engineer. Deliver the staff report. Hi, Ms. Johnson. How are you doing?
Good, how are
Thank
you?
you for being here tonight. Good.
Thanks for letting me speak with you this evening regarding upcoming municipal code changes that have to do with stormwater. The drivers for these code changes are that we received a MS4 stormwater permit, and we're also updating our Stormwater Management Manual, or SWIM. We want to reduce any kind of conflicts between the SWIM, which provides the design standards and the for water quality and procedures that developers need to go through to manage stormwater. We want to reduce the conflicts between that update and the municipal code. So that's why we're doing both of them together. Most of the changes are in Chapter 38, which is the utility code, and more specifically, Chapter 38.25, which is the stormwater code, and also Chapter 52, which is the erosion and sediment control code, because the sediment and erosion control code and the stormwater code kind of go hand in glove. They're very intricately, they're joined at the hip. If you're going to do a development, you have to do both. You have to do the stormwater management, and you have to have the erosion and sediment control under control. We removed sections in the utility code. When we went through this, our main thought was there are processes in here that should be in our stormwater management manual. They are in our stormwater management manual. And to reduce conflicts, we don't want them in the municipal code. We looked at the code as something where we're going to, somebody is violating our requirements, and that should be in the municipal code. Anything else should just be in the design manuals, which are our engineering design standards, detailed drawings, and our SWIM, the Stormwater Management Manual, and the Erosion and Sediment Control Manual. We also removed sections that talked about erosion and sediment control requirements. We removed that from the utility code so that there were, to minimize conflicts between Chapter 38 and Chapter 52. We removed sections that have to do with programs that are state and federal programs. They're supposed to enforce their programs. We don't want to get in the way of any kind of enforcement where they're actually supposed to do the enforcement. things like, that they may actually update their requirements, and if it's in our code, then we're out of sync with the state or federal, and we don't want to be that way. So we removed those. And then we also had programs in there in the utility code that we're not implementing. And there's no real reason to have them in there. Like we had information about fee in lieu of programs where somebody pays a fee in lieu of stormwater management. And over the years since we put in this stormwater management code in 2016, we've decided that there is a 99% likelihood that we will never institute a fee in lieu of program. And if we ever do something like that, then what we would do is then add that to the municipal code if we need to. So we kind of made the code much simpler. Doesn't look pretty because of all of the strikeouts that you'll receive later, but it'll be much simpler, easier to read. People will understand what is a violation and what isn't a violation. We simplified enforcement in that we had major and minor violations. Well, what is a major and a minor violation? Sometimes that can be up to interpretation, and again, people want to know if they're violating the code. We went to a class system where it's, if you violate the code, it's this fine. And the class system is actually in the Oregon Revised Statutes, which are updated probably more regularly than our chapter, what is it? I don't recall what chapter it is, but we have an enforcement section within our municipal code. It hasn't been updated since the 90s or something like that. And the Oregon Revised Statutes are probably updated more regularly because it has to do with money coming to the state. We also improved definitions, and this is something that is throughout the various chapters that have changes. We looked at the definitions. One thing I was really surprised at is that we improved definitions within 3825, and we didn't really change definitions from other chapters. We incorporated the definitions from, say, Chapter 50, the Development Code. We took those definitions and changed them in 3825 because the Chapter 50 definitions seem to be a better fit for what we're doing. And I found that surprising, but good in many ways. So Chapter 52 is the erosion and sediment control. We updated it to match our current policy. There are more procedures within Chapter 52 because while we do have a manual, which is where a lot of the policies and procedures should be in, it is a regional manual. It covers the entire Clackamas County group. There's Gladstone, West Lynn, Water Environment Services. We all share the same erosion and sediment control manual. And so because we're such a small city, we're urban as opposed to rural, which is most of Clackamas County. We still have some of those procedures within Chapter 52. So we matched current policy, current programs in regard to minimum requirements, what's required for plans when people submit them, inspections that are required. We simplified the enforcement, again, going to a class system, and we improved the definitions. Again, we added some definitions. We grabbed from other chapters because maybe they had better definitions and simplified language. Other chapters that I'll go through really quickly had minor changes where we clarified language, such as stormwater runoff is, it's like redundant. You can have runoff, you can have stormwater, but stormwater runoff is like saying it twice. We have storm sewer within the code. We changed that to stormwater because our stormwater system, we're trying to get people away from the idea that stormwater is treated, and when you say sewer system, they think that it goes to the wastewater treatment plant, which it does not. We also changed sanitary sewer to wastewater, again, updating it to current language. We updated document references, so if they referred to the Lake Oswego Surface Water Design Manual, which hasn't been in place for a long time, we changed that to the SWIM, the Stormwater Management Manual. So just document name changes. There are places in the different chapters that actually have the requirements from Chapter 38 spelled out, and we removed those and instead said, go see Chapter 38, or go see the Stormwater Management Manual for requirements. And again, that's to reduce future conflicts and after these updates get done. So Chapter 37, which is the street maintenance fee, clarified language. Again, that's stormwater versus storm sewer, things like that. System development charges, clarifying language. Chapter 42, there was actually a Chapter 40, which I missed on these slides, that had to do with language, clarifying language, and then it referred to requiring water quality or detention facilities, and we changed that to include all stormwater facilities, not just a small subset of the stormwater system. Chapter 42, we clarified language. We're referencing technical documents versus actually spelling out the different requirements. We updated the stormwater sections within this chapter to match our engineering design standards or to refer to our engineering design standards in our SWIM. Again, reducing conflicts. Chapter 45 is updating definitions. It talked about a 1200C permit being required for 5 acres and the 1200C permit, which is the state erosion and sediment control permit. It actually, the threshold for it is 1 acre. We also modified the information required for a geotechnical report, primarily because our Stormwater Management Manual also requires a geotechnical report, and rather than have people submit 2 different reports, one for building, one for engineering, if they include all the information, then it's only 1 report, less cost for the developers. We clarified where groundwater can go. Several years ago, developers were, when we started requiring these on-site stormwater facilities, they were connecting to the rain gardens and the stormwater planters. And in order to do that, these facilities were 5 feet below ground. And so you couldn't even get in to maintain them. It was dangerous. And so what we decided was that groundwater cannot connect to the stormwater facilities. It's also hard to design because you don't know how much groundwater is actually going to come in to these facilities. So we said, okay, you cannot connect to the stormwater facility. However, after down gradient from the stormwater facility, you can connect into the main system, our system, the public system. And that has seemed to work really well for the developers. They're happy, we're happy, everybody's happy. Chapter 46, again, I forgot a couple of these chapters. Huh?
Is everyone ever really very happy?
Well,
I think it's great, thank you. No,
as happy as everyone can
Right.
be, which is where you want to hit, right? Chapter 46, again, I missed that on the presentation. Stormwater has to meet that's the plumbing code, and we clarified that if your project exceeds the thresholds for requiring stormwater management, you have to follow the SWIM. If your project does not meet those thresholds, you must follow the plumbing code. And the plumbing code requires a stormwater management facility, but it's different than what we require. Our engineering requirements are much more detailed than the plumbing code. Both require somewhere to manage stormwater, but again, there's those two thresholds. So under the threshold, plumbing code; over the threshold, engineering.
What was the threshold again?
So if you have a project that creates 1,000 or more square feet, you are required to do stormwater management.
Okay. So most projects.
Most projects, there are some small additions, patios, some ADUs that are under garages that are under the threshold.
Right. So most new projects are using
Most
the
new
stormwater, I
projects,
see.
yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, because most people are building a home, they're tearing down and rebuilding, or,
The same as it is now.
yeah,
It's okay.
yeah, it's currently 1,000 square feet. Chapter 50, the development code, I was happy, surprised, but happy that there are very few changes to it. We clarified language again, stormwater versus storm sewer. We are referencing Chapter 38 rather than having the requirements actually spelled out in Chapter 50. And we updated some definitions. They had a definition in there that for manhole that didn't quite meet engineering definitions, and so we put that definition in there. But that was the only one that we totally changed, which is a good thing. Chapter 51, clarified language. Again, that's surface water versus stormwater versus storm sewer. And then Chapter 55, I think that one had to do with stormwater runoff. So we changed it just to stormwater. This summer, we are going to do some public outreach starting in early August. And we will have an online comment form for the public to provide comments on the code changes. We will post on social media. I'm currently working with Katie Kirkland on newsletters, and she'll do the social media. But we'll also have articles in the Hello LO, the LO Down. We're going to ask that the Chamber of Commerce put a news article in their newsletter so that we can reach the businesses and developers. The outreach will be early August to early September. In August, we'll have a planning commission meeting, and then in September, October, I'll come back to the council where we'll actually delve into the specific changes that'll be made. And I'm hoping for a code adoption that will be effective December 1st, given all the noticing that's required. The December 1st deadline is 90% firm. It's the deadline that's in the MS4 permit, and so that's the deadline we're working towards. Are there any questions? I know that it was a lot.
Thank you very much for all of your work on this riveting topic. Yes, Councilor Corrigan.
Yeah, that's a lot. So I just, from my understanding, has this caused changes to the way we do anything? Are we simply stating it appropriately to be compliant with our stormwater permit?
There are very few, in fact, I can't think of really any substantial changes that we're making. It's simplification. Yeah.
Thank you, Councilor Corrigan. Councilor Afghan.
Ms. Johnson, about 3-4 decades ago when I was a young engineer, I had the same questions for my mentors and coaches. Why do we call this storm sewer? Why do we call this storm water runoff? So everything you said here, I asked them back then, and believe it or not, they had good reasons to call them that. But because of the environmental laws that we have had over the past 3-4 decades, we're lucky enough to sit here and say, we can simplify this, because a whole lot of stuff through regulation has caused these types of streamlining. So,
The industry has matured.
and the industry has matured for sure. One comment and one question. I think to answer Councilor Corrigan's question, the way I understood this change is that not only we're simplifying, but we're also trying to be consistent with state of Oregon requirement. That way we don't have additional requirements that doesn't make sense. Did I read that correctly?
We do have additional requirements.
Okay.
We've had additional requirements since 2016. But in general, they all revert back to the MS4 or stormwater permit. That's the driving authority that says you have, once we issue a permit to you or reissue a permit, because we've had a permit since the 90s, and every 4 to 5 years, we're supposed to get a new permit. Our newest permit was given to us in '21, and we have spent the last couple of years updating other programs where the requirements were in the newest permit and changing them to match the requirements. So the newest permit that was sent out in '21, that's what we're trying to match.
Okay.
And so there are a couple of changes within that permit that require us to add additional requirements to our stormwater management manual.
Okay. The simplified enforcement, escalating enforcement requirement of the newest stormwater permit, that is being consistent with the state?
Correct. That our permit requires escalating for enforcement. In other words, you can't just keep going back to the violator and saying the same thing. You have to say, okay, you violated the code, please change it. And if they don't change it, this is the way we generally tend to work with violators. We do education first, and if it doesn't provide the effect that we want, then we have to go to like a stop work order, kind of get their attention that way. And if the stop work order doesn't work out, we go to the penalty or we go to other means. We have the ability actually to remove access to our stormwater system for somebody who won't reconnect. Like if there's an illicit discharge, they're connected to our stormwater system, but they're throwing in wastewater of some kind. We can actually cut them off from our stormwater system. But that would be,
Very
it would have to
unusual,
be
yes. I think I remember this conversation last year, but I had a call from one of our residences that was panicking because it said escalating enforcement, and this person was sort of imagining that we're going to take control of their properties and move on. So I had to explain that, and I intentionally asked this question publicly so those who are listening, it's not that case. So thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilor Afghan. Councilor Woodland.
So you said the stormwater doesn't go through our sewer system. Where does it go?
Stormwater is treated in not treated. Stormwater is disposed of in a couple of ways. Developments are required to manage stormwater, so they only release it, slowly instead of overwhelming the system, because when you have a grassy area, a natural area, it absorbs the water. Whereas then if you pave that area, all the stormwater runs off within a couple of minutes. The grassy area, it may take an hour before that water actually reaches the street. So they have to manage the stormwater. And with the treatment, we have stormwater facilities which actually remove solid particulates, like sediment, dirt. It removes other pollutants per se, but then it goes into our public stormwater system, which then goes to the streams. So it's not like we send it to a stormwater treatment, we don't send it to the wastewater treatment plant. The wastewater treatment plant, actually, if you add in stormwater to it, you get a lot of overflows, which is what Portland deals with, because they've got a combined system. We have a separated system where the stormwater goes to the lake, or to our streams, or to the rivers, or it gets infiltrated into the ground.
And what would you say with all the codes and everything that we've done since we've kind of recognized that stormwater is a factor? How much stormwater do we actually capture through our policy over the, I mean, in other words, do we have an overabundance of stormwater that we're not dealing with, or are we kind of about average, or are we really good at stormwater management?
Our permit says that we're supposed to capture 80%, so I will leave it at that.
80?
80% of the annual average runoff.
Okay.
How would you ever measure that?
Yeah.
How would you ever measure that?
Carefully, very carefully.
Very carefully.
How would you
Well,
possibly-
you take the average annual impervious area in the city with the average precipitation, and then you get to the number. It's models.
And what I'm trying to figure out is, how do we know if we're, I mean, I love simplifying code. That's a great thing. If the person who is building or remodeling or doing something, hopefully all these revisions will make it easier for them to understand. Is that correct? I mean, theoretically?
Yes, in the fact that
If you're not a stormwater engineer, you won't understand it?
no, the manual should include all the procedures that somebody needs to follow. They shouldn't have to worry about following the code when they're designing stormwater facilities. And with things in both places, there's always the chance that the manual says one thing and the code says another, and then you've got conflict, you've got loopholes, you've got, who says which is what. And so we're trying to reduce that conflict. And we're trying to, again, get to industry standard language, so that when I say stormwater, people understand what it is. And when we say stormwater system, people understand that we're talking about the public stormwater system, and, when it's coming from engineering. It's the public stormwater system and not the rivers and streams. So we have a surface water utility system, surface water management system that includes the public stormwater system plus the rivers and streams. But when we talk about stormwater management, we're primarily talking just about the public stormwater system. And these changes in the code, the changes in the language, will provide that clarity. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm just trying to figure out, how do we know that we're progressing and not falling back? I mean, or do we know that? I mean, is it, I look at codes as being something, or even the little policy manual that you have, as moving us forward. And I'm trying to figure out, will this help us with the management of stormwater in a better, more efficient way? And will it improve our situation? And or do you need additional code to do that?
Well, never say never.
Right.
But I'm hoping that we won't return to the code for another 4 years or another couple of years when the new permit when the permit is reissued.
Right. But I guess I'm just trying to figure out, is all this work that you've done going to move us forward?
I believe so. In that, again, we're going to reduce any kind of conflict between the code and the manual. Yeah, am I not?
I think I understand your question. And what I want to say is that, and many of you know this, we don't have physical stormwater systems everywhere in the city. And the stormwater management manual and our MS4 permits and stuff take into account and give us direction on what we need to do so that we make incremental improvements, so that when these individual houses come in, they account for their stormwater. They didn't do that 30 years ago. They just let it go wherever. Now that houses are bigger, I'm using housing because that's what we typically develop here. Now that houses are bigger, we need to be more conscientious about how to manage that. And you don't have as much yard on some of these lots now that the houses have gotten bigger. We've gone from small bungalow to large house. There's not a lot for the water to infiltrate, so we have to be more effective and more strategic in the management of it. And the management manual and the codes are those tools for helping us ensure that. I do believe we're making progress on all of that. We have capital work that needs to be done, but we do need to continue to implement these on a case-by-case basis for individual developments. We need to make sure that that their runoff from their development and their impact is accounted for and managed the best we can. The other thing that Sonia does that we haven't talked about here at all is that she's constantly, as a part of the MS4 permit, we have annual reporting that is done. She does an amazing job producing those every year. And those reports have a lot to do with testing of our streams and all kinds, I don't know how many things you test for in there, but she collects data samples all year long. Every time we have a big rain, out there collecting samples from the stormwater system so that we can look at over time, are we getting better or are we getting worse? And we can bring that back to you at another time to talk about those annual reports and what they show, because I don't think we've been here to talk about those very often.
Right.
We could give you that picture to answer the question, are we making any progress?
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
One way to measure that
this is a
in the
tremendous
streams.
amount of work, and I appreciate it very much. But part of it is are we just rearranging the words so that it's maybe a little bit more understandable, or are we rearranging the words so that we have a methodology that's going to move us forward so that we have better results in our stormwater management? And I mean, that's always, to me, it's always the, it's maybe hard to maybe precisely measure it, but I just want to know that with all the hard work that you're doing, that you're going to get some payoff at the end, other than just checking. I know we need the permit. We have to check the box for the permit, but to me, it's just like being in a habit trail, going around in circles, if all we're doing is rearranging the words just to satisfy a public entity, the state or whatever, to get a permit. I would hope that what you're doing is going to help either make it more efficient for people to understand, maybe less argument of the code versus the manual book, but also that we're moving forward to help the stormwater system be more efficient and better utilize cleaner water. You know, I remember when there was a big campaign to stop washing your car in the driveway because it was putting all kinds of phosphorus in the stormwater. And all the little kids learned it in school, and they came home and said, no, you can't wash your car, you have to use this, or stop using the fertilizer on your lawn, use this and whatever. And so I guess I'm just trying to move us as a community forward to say, hey, stormwater does count. If we put garbage into it, garbage is going to come out, and that's not good. And we want a better environment. And so I'm just trying to figure out if all this work will help us achieved that in a somewhat a better way.
The manual update does address changes that will make stormwater cleaner. But the code, which is what we're talking about tonight, like I said, we're trying to take all of these processes that should be within the manual, and we're removing them from the code so that the code is simpler to understand. And people understand that, hey, if I do this thing that's in the code, that it's a violation of and I'm going to get, there's going to be enforcement applied. Whereas before, it kind of had a lot of processes in it, and again, if it's in the code, it can be a violation. If it's in the manual, it's what's required for managing stormwater according to our permit. We do, and just as an aside, we have done some work on trend analysis, not very much and not very deep. And I can tell you that our water is getting cleaner. The streams are showing improvement. The bugs that live in the stream, the animals that live in the stream, they're not coming back full force, but they're getting better. In fact, we're doing another, we call them macroinvertebrates. It's a bug survey. We're doing another one this fall that I'm hoping will show at least some improvement.
Great. That's
Wonderful.
perfect.
Okay.
Those are good. Those are happy answers.
Thank you, Councilwoman. As we, so we're doing this public outreach around this. What exactly, what kind of feedback are we trying to get on this kind of, difficult to understand topic?
I don't know. We just want to make people aware that it's occurring, so that it doesn't come as a surprise. We don't want to surprise the public. We don't want to surprise the business community, and hence the public outreach.
So what could we talk more? So what are the little changes and all that stuff? Is like how would someone be surprised?
What we don't want to do is just say, we did code changes and there's 52 pages of code changes and have a nice day. We want people to know that these changes are, how many times you said clarify? I don't know. But we're simplifying and clarifying it. And we want people to be aware that this is not making it harder for anybody, developers in particular, to do the work that they were doing before, but it should clarify things by cleaning up the code and making it less cumbersome, and then putting it all in one place in the SWIM. So we want to be sure to catch that before we have a public hearing at a code, it was ordinance?
Code adoption?
Yeah, at the adoption, that would require a public hearing, so we want to make sure that we don't catch anybody by surprise, so that's why the public outreach.
Right. So I think, so if we understand correctly, no real substantive changes, clarifications, and, I just wonder if this is the kind of thing we should do more targeted outreach. I just cannot imagine Jane Q. Oswego getting the lowdown and thinking like, what on earth does this have to do with me? Or should we not be reaching out to like the HBA, people that get permits from the city to do building? I mean, because they, honestly, if they're not living here, they're not getting the lowdown. So I just wonder if maybe we're going to miss the target audience for this, which I do not think is the majority of our residents, and more the community who actually has to comply with the code.
Well, that's why we're reaching out to the Chamber of Commerce to have something in their newsletter so that the various businesses in the area can find out when we update the manual. We'll provide notification of those updates and invite comments from the building community. So they will be, I don't think they're going to be necessarily super interested in code changes as much as they would be interested in the manual changes. And so we do have, just as we did a couple of years ago when we updated the manual back in 2020, 2019, we reached out to the business community, the developer community, and we asked for comments. And so we'll do that same thing with the manual sometime this fall.
Okay, so you're going to specifically reach out to the the contact list that we have at the city for this community that does this kind of work?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I just don't know if we need to, not that it's bad to put it out, I just don't think this is something that, especially if there's really no, like, what would we do with comments? I really hate putting things out there if we're just gonna be like, well, thanks for your comments. You know, but we can't do anything about it because we have to comply with our permit and, you know, what do you know anyway? Because you're not an engineer and this is very technical and, you know, I just think we should be cognizant. If we're gonna put things out for comment, we have to be willing to make changes because of the comment received. And if that's just not the case, that's fine. It's just not effective public engagement. You know, if we're just serving to inform, we should say, this is an FYI, these are changes, and they should go out to people who will understand them, you know, and this is not necessarily people who might be alarmed by them or not like, what the heck is this? Because if I got to be like, should I be concerned about, like, I don't know. Is this going to impact me? I have no idea. I've never had to do anything with the stormwater code in my life, but it's on the front of the lowdown, and now maybe I need to be worried about it.
So are you suggesting that we just reach out to the Chamber of Commerce?
Well, I mean, my suggestion would be to reach out to just these particular stakeholders who, I mean, the chamber's great, but maybe even the HBA or just the particular list of folks that we know that come in for these
All the
permits
contractors
day in
that
and day out. Yeah,
the
exactly.
contractors that we do business with.
Okay, we could do that. We could keep the online comment form, so
Yeah.
that would make it easier for them to provide comments. Everybody, you know, it's easy to pull up a website, a little bit harder to go, what was that email address again? And who was that I was supposed to email? So we can do that.
Get that feedback.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because it's so much, you've done so much good, you know, work on this, but it's you know, the last time that you were here, we were talking about kind of like outdoor storage areas and is that part of this update or is that just something entirely different?
That was a different code update. That had to do with the commercial and industrial business inspection program, where we're going on to, we're required by the state to go on to facilities and make sure that they're storing hazardous waste properly.
Right.
And items like that, and that they're not cross-connected.
Right. And you guys did a great job getting information out about that so people knew it was happening, and, you know, the relevant folks. So
Hit the target market.
get the target market. that's
Appreciate
right.
that feedback, yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. Any other, you have another question?
I totally understand where you're going, Mr. Mayor. Simplification, streamline, efficient, productive. I also think that since we do have a process for code and manual updating, let's follow that as well. So we're in full compliance, and I think in this case, nobody's going to show up and say, why are you simplifying this? So I suggest that we do both, go through the process that we normally do, and then also have a targeted audience that we ask for their feedback.
Well, I don't agree with that, but that's fine. Yeah.
Well, we still have to go through the
deviating from
hearing, which is a public
Right.
venue.
Yeah, we're not suggesting that we don't go through the legal process. I think what's been proposed is just discretionary outreach and things, and we're just trying to make it more
Then
targeted
we're on
and
the same
efficient.
page. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Comments? Okay. Johnson, Director Rooney, thank you very much.
Thank you for your input.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Appreciate
your
it.
time. Thank you for all your work on this. And our second and final study session of this evening is the electric vehicle charging strategy. We have Ms. Watson, Sustainability
It's a
Program
work
Manager,
session.
presenting to us on this.
Good evening, Mayor and councilors. My name is
Good
Amanda
afternoon.
Watson. I'm the city's Sustainability Program Manager. I'm here to talk to you about our electric vehicle charging strategy. So just to start, why are we talking about an electric vehicle charging strategy to begin with? As you know, transportation is the second largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Lake Oswego, so it's an important part of our sustainability and climate action plan. Transitioning to electric vehicles is a really key strategy in the plan for
Oh, there we go.
thank you, for the short to medium term, and it complements longer-term strategies to decarbonize transportation, such as building out biking and walking infrastructure, which the city is working on, and improving public transit access to provide more sustainable options for everyone to get around the city. So we want to support the transition to electric vehicles, not only for climate reasons, although that is the primary reason, but there's a number of other benefits they provide to our community. Electric vehicles have a lower operating cost and a lower lifetime cost compared with gasoline-powered vehicles, so that helps residents in that way. They also have zero tailpipe emissions, so they improve local air quality, and also are reduced noise compared with gasoline-powered vehicles. So there's a number of community benefits that come with increasing electric vehicles in LO. The good news is that EV adoption in Lake Oswego currently outpaces the state as a whole, which is about 2% across Oregon. 2% of all light-duty vehicles are electric vehicles in Oregon. However, there's several factors, including continued lack of familiarity with the technology, higher upfront vehicle costs still, and insufficient access to EV charging infrastructure that pose barriers to more widespread adoption of EVs beyond those early adopters, of which we have many here in Lake Oswego. So the EV charging strategy is going to look at how the city can address one of those barriers, which has to do with promoting more equitable access to charging options for residents. So these are the goals in the city's sustainability and climate action plan that have to do with transportation electrification. So this provides the framework for the strategy. You'll see EV1 is missing from this list. That has to do with electrifying the city's fleet, which we are working on. And the charging strategy will support that work, but isn't the focus of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be focusing more on charging for the community as a whole and not just for city vehicles. As you'll see, all of these strategies on the board here relate to expanding access to EV charging infrastructure. Again, the project objectives here for the electric vehicle charging infrastructure: expanding equitable access to charging to meet transportation electrification goals, clarifying the role of the city and identifying opportunities to partner with other organizations and businesses to expand access, and then positioning the city and our partners to access the local, state, and federal incentives and grant opportunities that are available right now for charging. So there's a really big opportunity, the kind of why now piece of it. I'm going to do a little bit of an overview of what we're talking about here, mostly for our audience. I know a lot of you are familiar, so I apologize if this is a review, but for folks in the public, what are we talking about when we're talking about electric vehicle charging? This diagram shows the major components of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Everything from the meter to the left is on the utility side, so this is equipment that's controlled by Portland General Electric in Lake Oswego, and everything from the meter to the right is customer side. So when we talk about needing to install electric vehicle charging infrastructure, that can include things like running the conduit and the electrical wire from the electrical panel to the parking spot where the charging station needs to be installed. So just wanted to give a little bit of a bigger picture that charging infrastructure is not just that EV charger that you plug into the vehicle to charge. It's a bigger endeavor than that. Really quickly on EV charger types, again, maybe a review, but there's three main types of electric vehicle chargers, and they're characterized by their power output, which relates to the charging speed. So level 1 is your typical, the output is your standard household outlet. So this is the lowest charging speed. It requires a longer charging time, but it is practical for at-home or workplace charging, where a vehicle will be parked for a long amount of time and can charge, during the day or overnight. Level 1 charging can also be used to charge electric scooters and e-bikes, so it's good for micromobility, and they typically don't require electrical service upgrades or expensive hardware, so it's the lowest cost option. Level 2 charging infrastructure in between provides charging through 220 or 240 volt electrical service. It's really common for home charging as well as workplace charging and public charging. So the city's chargers are all level 2 chargers. It has a charging speed roughly 5 times as fast as level 1 charger. and it may require electrical service upgrades in addition to infrastructure or equipment costs when installing it. Finally, direct current fast chargers, or DCFC, you may have seen that, are the fastest types of chargers. They can provide up to 500 kilowatts of power output, but mostly it's 150 and 350 kilowatt chargers that we see out in public currently, and they charge most EVs under an hour. So they're primarily used for public charging along busy routes like highways, or in places where cars are only parked for a short amount of time, like grocery stores. We have them here in Lake Oswego at the New Seasons Palisades and at Bank of America across the street. So folks where people can pull in, charge quickly, and leave. They're not there for an extended amount of time. Because of the high power requirements, DC fast chargers often require electrical service upgrades to install. And in general, the cost for a vehicle to charge at this charging equipment and the cost to deploy the equipment increases with the output of the charger. So you see level 1 being the most inexpensive and direct current fast charging being the most expensive. So that's enough for the background for now. I'll bring us to, oh yeah, of course.
If you buy a Tesla and you buy their charger, which one are you at? The 1, 2, or you're not at the 3, but are you at the 2?
Teslas can actually charge in all 3. Tesla has their own charging network, and I believe the majority of them are level 2, but they just this year opened up their proprietary charging network to other vehicles as well. But the majority of electric vehicles can use all 3 types of charging. The exception is plug-in hybrids, so hybrid vehicles that you plug in to charge. Most of the models that are on the market now cannot charge at DC fast chargers, but that may change.
But it would be at a number 2 level?
Yeah,
one.
plugins would be
2 or
level
1.
1 or level 2. Yep.
So your EV people over here, at home you have a 2, right? Okay.
Yeah.
220 in the garage.
You mean you could do the 1, but it just takes
But-
forever.
Right,
It takes a whole week.
Yeah.
or you don't drive very far, right, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I think the estimate for level 1 is they say it's approximately 40 miles of electric range in 8 hours for your midsize. So that's, it gets you not quite as far as you may want to go in a couple days. So not the most efficient way to charge, but it can be a useful option. Thanks for the question. And yeah, feel free to stop me as I go along too. So what is the current state of electric vehicles and charging in Lake Oswego? Like I said, EV adoption in Lake Oswego is pretty high, relatively high. 7.7% of all light-duty vehicles, or about 1 in 13 people who have a car in Lake Oswego, drive an EV. So light-duty vehicles, passenger cars, SUVs, pickup trucks. We have a good amount of public charging. We have 45 public level 2 charging points, 10 of which are city-owned, and 8 DC fast charger charging points across the town. And in October of 2023, so last year, we did a survey of LO residents to try to understand charging behavior for people who already have an electric vehicle and general attitudes about electric vehicles. And that survey found that over 85% of EV owners and then non-EV owners both said that they either currently charge at home or they would prefer to charge at home if they had an electric vehicle. So that was by far and large the preferred way for people to charge their vehicles. This finding is supported by national research. It really shows that at-home charging is the most convenient and it's the lowest cost option for people, and that's an important factor in people's decisions to buy an electric vehicle in the first place. So we see that charging, and particularly, again, this access to convenient, low-cost charging is an important factor for EV adoption. Local research by PGE found, again, that lack of charging infrastructure was the second highest barrier to purchasing or leasing an EV. So that's why we're here talking about charging specifically today. So the electric vehicle charging strategy, we're looking at taking an equitable approach to this. So that really looks at where charging is most needed in our community. How can we address the gaps in access to reliable and convenient EV charging to support adoption and meet our goals? So first, let's start with thinking about, how much charging do we need, right? We know that most current EV drivers charge at home, but more public charging is going to be needed over time so that people who don't have access to charging at home can also benefit from electric vehicles. Public charging also helps support EV adoption by addressing range anxiety, so it gives people confidence that they can fill up their car and they can get to where they need to go without needing to charge. So it's useful for folks even if they don't rely on public charging for their daily charging needs. And in terms of numbers, the statewide analysis from ODOT says that to meet the state's 2035 goals, urban areas will need to see a 5-fold increase in charging stations. So that's public charging stations, workplace charging, and DC fast charging. Assuming that by 2035, 65% of charging happens at home. So right now we're at 85 to 90%. So 65, depending, based on the amount of single-family households we have in Lake Oswego, that would be, everyone who has a detached home charges at home and everyone else doesn't. That would be like the 2035 scenario. It's safe to expect that the number of EVs and LO is going to at least double over the next 5 years. We've seen an average of 30% growth each year in the past 5 years. So I think doubling would be, a fairly conservative estimate. And so, long story short, we will need a lot more charging, and a good amount of that will need to be public to support folks who don't have access to at-home charging. When we talk about gaps and, who has the gaps, for whom does lack of access to EV charging prevent them from owning an electric vehicle? That is really, primarily residents of multifamily buildings, especially older multifamily buildings, because there's a number of barriers to installing EV charging. It's expensive. There may not be sufficient off-street parking for people. Where it's a condo community and units are individually owned, there can be financial barriers for folks to install their own charging in parking that does exist. So primarily multifamily residents, as well as renters and lower income residents, which these may overlap, are those folks who face the most barriers to accessing that convenient, low-cost at-home charging. Another group who doesn't have as strong access to charging in Lake Oswego is the daytime population. So we have a large number of folks who commute into Lake Oswego for jobs, and then we also have visitors who come to our parks and activities, the farmers market, weekend events, and so that's a really significant group that we want to support to drive electric vehicles to be able to improve local air quality. Right, if we have 20,000 people coming into work in Lake Oswego, that's 20,000 vehicles, and if we can get 10% of those to be electric, that's still a significant reduction of local local emissions and improves our air quality. So in terms of what type of charging is needed to address these communities that lack access in Lake Oswego, it's really public and workplace charging that best supports these groups. Again, because they either are visitors and they don't have home charging here, or they are folks that don't have that access there. Primarily, level 2 charging is going to be the best balance of speed and price to meet those needs, but there's some applications that exist for level 1 charging. If, maybe at some workplaces where folks are parked 8 hours a day and can get a good amount of charging that way, and some level 3 charging as well. And when we're thinking about the specific types of charging, it's going to be really important that we match the technology. So whether it's a wall-mounted charger or a light pole-mounted charger, a pedestal charger, need to match that with the specific needs of the community that will be using it, the residents and visitors, and then the site constraints. It's really not a one-size-fits-all solution. So this is just another way to look at the charging gaps in Lake Oswego on a geographic perspective here. So this map shows, and apologies, it's a bit small, but it shows multifamily housing in Lake Oswego. So that's the pink and the red, condos and apartments, and then it shows existing public charging stations. And you'll see on the map, those are labeled in green and orange, but I made them blue just to make it a little more visible on the screen here. The public charging stations are ones that are available on maps that you would see if you drive an EV or plug share. and other publicly available data. So there are some additional workplace charging stations and some private charging stations at multifamily buildings like the Windward downtown, the Springs at Lake Oswego Senior Living Community. A handful of buildings have charging stations, but they aren't going to show up on this map because this is only stuff that's listed as being public for anyone to access. But just looking at the map, you can see already that there's some geographic gaps as well. So Mountain Park has more multifamily housing, but no publicly available charging stations. Even in Foothills, there's a little bit of gap there too. So just another way to kind of visualize what charging looks like and what some of those population and geographic gaps are. So when we think about where is charging needed or what are good sites, what makes a good site for public EV charging to address these gaps? Again, nearby multifamily housing that doesn't already have charging for their residents, prioritizing things like affordable housing, areas where there's more renters or lower income residents, nearby points of interest like parks, the library, transit hubs, schools, shopping areas, places where people will want to be for a little bit of time so that they can actually get a meaningful charge from their vehicle. And then making sure that the locations have publicly accessible parking 24/7 to allow for that reliable access, that they're ADA accessible, so we can make sure, again, that we have equitable access to this infrastructure. And the last one, available electrical capacity, is really about controlling costs, so making sure that, being closer to a transformer or an electrical panel and having sufficient power capacity to reduce the cost of installation for charging. Again, it's also ideal if charging can serve multiple purposes, so we can think about installing charging infrastructure at a workplace that could then be used by neighborhood residents in the evening and have that dual purpose to serve two populations that need it. Before I move on, so in the next section, I'm going to go through a set of draft actions for City Council to consider about how do we address these charging gaps that we've identified, and just a little bit of process. So these actions came through a combination of kind of research and outreach. We reviewed other cities' electric vehicle readiness plans, EV charging plans, and the state of Oregon's plan. So they had a roadmap, how do we meet Oregon's goals, and spoke with the staff that developed those plans, consulted with City of Lake Oswego staff, the Sustainability Advisory Board, as well as a number of external stakeholders. The Lake Oswego Sustainability Network was one of them, and their members contributed some research for the report, were a good support. And reached out to some developers, multifamily property owners, and businesses in Lake Oswego to get their experiences with EV charging, including some folks who do have charging, to understand what the process of installation was like. So the actions have three different categories based on the primary role of the city, so to educate, enable, and install. So the first possible action the city can take to support greater access to EV charging in the community is educating. So we could consider conducting targeted outreach and education focused on these target populations that lack access, about the benefits of EV charging, what different technologies are out there, and in particular about those available local, state, and federal financial incentives for installing charging infrastructure. So PGE has rebates, the state of Oregon has rebates, and there are some federal incentives as well. And these can be really key in making those investments possible for building owners in particular, that it's currently can seem really challenging and is quite expensive to do. The Lake Oswego Sustainability Network, I mentioned they were one of the groups consulted for this work. They've expressed interest in being a part of this type of work, and in particular focused on multifamily buildings. They have found a charging company that could potentially work with them to go building to building and talk to buildings about solutions that work for them and educate residents. And so knowing that community group is really interested in that, the city could focus on outreach to large employers and businesses to kind of complement those efforts in terms of education. In the enable category, we could develop criteria to identify those priority locations, so kind of what I had on the previous slide, but what makes a good location for charging infrastructure to help communicate our community's needs to private charging companies, establish best practice for installations of charging stations and make sure that those equipment is future-proofed in our community, right? That we're seeing the investment that we want to see and we're directing it to the places that need it the most. Potentially, we could use something like this to tailor provision of incentives or additional support to chargers that meet these priority locations or in priority areas. We can also adopt standardized signing and install EV charging wayfinding signage for those publicly accessible chargers. That, it helps current EV drivers, but even more, it helps address that range anxiety, and it helps normalize electric vehicles and improve adoption that way. This was a recommendation from the Sustainability Advisory Board, and as a result, we installed charging signs for the City Hall chargers last year, so you probably see them when you drive into work. The second set of enable actions, these are both code-related, and we'd need to engage the Planning Commission on exploring both of these. So the first one, adopt EV-ready codes that require new developments to provide more parking spaces with charging infrastructure than the minimum required by state codes. This is the climate-friendly, equitable communities rules, and currently they require that new developments with at least 5 residential units have to provide for 40% of charging 40% of parking spots be EV ready, so have the electrical capacity and the conduit to be able to install a charger. Under those rules, cities can go above and beyond that. So for example, the City of Portland last year passed a code that required, instead of 40% of spots for these new developments be EV ready, 100% need to be EV ready for small parking lots with 6 or fewer spaces, and 50% for larger parking lots. So they increased that minimum. So we could consider doing something similar.
You kind of just clarified that this is for on-site parking?
Yes, yeah, this is for on-site. So if a development has its own parking lot, this dictates the minimum number of spots that have to be EV ready or wired to be able to install a charger.
Okay.
Yeah. Relatedly, but separately, we could consider requiring developers to provide for EV charging in the right-of-way when a housing project won't provide any parking. So the other part of climate-friendly, equitable communities has to do with parking regulations. I know you've separately talked about that, but this could help us, align our parking-related, charging-related requirements with the development that we expect to see, right? As we plan for more density, making sure that there are charging options provided, even when there is not on-site parking provided for a development. That helps us kind of future-proof that development to meet current and future EV charging needs. Again, these both would need to go through the Planning Commission. I spoke with planning staff, and they're interested in engaging the commission on the topics, but again, that would have to be a process through that body as well, and eager to get your feedback on these two. The final enable actions, we could explore options to provide incentives for private businesses and building owners to install publicly available charging stations on their properties. It could be things like technical assistance, right? So again, pointing folks to the financial and other resources that are available, helping people understand the charging options and the technology that exists, or considering electrical permit fee reductions, which it's currently around $200, I believe, for level 2 charging. So that may not be a very big lever or have a lot of wiggle room, but we can explore what those incentives could look like. The second option would be to develop a right-of-way charging program that permits businesses to install curbside charging stations following established rules, or allows residents to do the same or to extend a charging cord from their house to the curb to enable curbside charging. I want to note that staff is not recommending this at the time, but I wanted to highlight this as a common approach that a lot of other cities have taken, including Portland, Seattle, Washington, D.C., and others. It's essentially establishing rules that helps direct private investment to ensure that charging is reliable and accessible. The reason it's not recommended at this time is that, there's a lot of other needs and uses for the right-of-way, like bike lanes and other access. We have a lot of narrow roads in Lake Oswego, and not all parts of town have people using curbside parking a lot. And so I think this particular option needs more evaluation. It may be that as we do outreach, this could emerge as a more promising option. But again, I wanted to highlight it. I don't know that it's the most, it's the best option right now, but it is certainly a very common approach among cities that are looking at expanding public charging infrastructure. Final category of actions, and we have just one action here, is installing charging infrastructure. So really deploying EV charging at city facilities and public parking lots. This is essentially implementing the action that's already in our sustainability and climate action plan. The question here is which facilities, how much charging overall, and what is our timeline, noting that that's a really significant investment. Charging infrastructure is expensive, and you have a few costs up on the screen here, which I'll explain in a minute, but I wanted to note that the staff report also mentioned partnering with PGE on 2 programs that they have. But since then, I learned from PGE they're no longer expanding that Electric Avenue program. So they have some Electric Avenue public charging installations in other cities, but they're not adding to that. They've moved away from essentially installing and owning charging infrastructure more broadly to focus on the make-ready side, the utility side infrastructure, and really focusing on providing infrastructure in underserved communities. So the other program that's mentioned in the staff report, the pole-mounted charging or municipal charging pilot, PGE is focused on, again, assisting underserved and low-income communities, of which there are none in Lake Oswego under the criteria that they use. So we're not currently eligible. I'm, in constant contact with PGE on various programs, and so if that changes, that's an opportunity we could revisit, but that's currently not something that we are able to pursue at the time. So in terms of facilities, new city facilities, we already are planning to install charging. So for example, Lorac, Rosique Park, and others. So, we're planning ahead for it. But the question is, adding charging to our existing facilities that provides charging options for visitors, for city vehicles, employees, and the public, right? This is kind of that multi-use charging. The table on the screen here has some cost estimates from ODOT. They're based on national data with Oregon data supplemented it. And the range is the 50th to 75th percentile of cost. It includes equipment and installation, but it's only the customer side of installation. So these ranges don't take into account if any utility side electrical upgrades are needed. So say putting in a DC fast charger and you might need to upgrade the transformer, or you might need to upgrade the transmission wiring. That is not included in these cost estimates, and neither is soft costs like permits or site easements and things like that. So as you see, it's quite a big range. A few caveats is that if the charging infrastructure is all there, the make-ready is all there. For example, we replaced the A Avenue charger a couple years ago. The current charger was broken. We had to swap it out. That project cost, so everything but the charger itself was there. That was $13,000. So the low end of that level 2 there, lower than that range. And a couple years ago, so prices have come up. So just wanted to give you a real estate. This is expensive. It is really important, and it's essential to meeting our EV charging and EV adoption goals, but these are expensive projects, and so I wanted to kind of give a sense of what that looks like. Other thing to note is there's economies of scale when you install more than one charger at a site. That brings the cost down per charger. And then new charging technologies are coming out, fairly rapidly. There's a lot of innovation, particularly in the public charging space and the multifamily charging space right now. So people coming up with options to add charging to light poles and things like that, where it's easier and cheaper to install. So these estimates were, I think, a couple of years ago from ODOT as well. So there may be, again, other solutions in the lower end of the range here. So out of those actions, the staff recommendation that you saw from the staff report, with the exception of the right-of-way charging program at this time, we're essentially recommending an all of the above strategy. And so the real question is, where do we want to prioritize city staff time and investment? And what does the timeline look like? And how do we want to budget for it? So I'd love to hear, any questions that you have out of the actions presented. Are there any that you feel should be prioritized over others? Anything that's missing? And yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Watson. I just, do we have any, so of the chargers that are out there now, is there any good, because, there's ones, like in the right of way. We have ones that's then on public property at city facilities, and then we have the majority of them, I think, on private property accessible to the public. Is there any data on like the utilization of these chargers, like which, and who's using them? or-
Yeah, we have data on the utilization of our chargers, but unfortunately not the other public chargers. But in terms of, we have chargers at City Hall on 8th Avenue, so the right-of-way charger, and then in the maintenance center. City Hall and 8th Avenue are very heavily used and the most popular, and the maintenance center less so, but I just spoke with staff yesterday, and I guess they're getting kind of some more repeat visitors, so it's picking up there as well. But yeah, those two. 8th Avenue, or City Hall rather, we both have some city staff that use it and visitors, so that's kind of that hybrid workplace and public charging. And then 8th Avenue is public primarily.
And the visitors that use it, they use it while they're here conducting their business, so kind of short term?
It depends. We do have some vehicles that, I come here every day, so I recognize and, are charging daily or for longer amounts of time. And some people that just come in while they're at City Hall conducting business. That we have a couple mechanisms to manage how it's used, right? Because we have a limited number of chargers. We want to make sure a lot of people can use it. So we have pricing that if you're parked and charging more than 2 hours, a parking fee starts. And so to encourage folks to move, it's more expensive to be there for a long amount of time. And we also, will be enforcing if people are parked and not actively charging in that spot, they'll need to move. But yeah, it really depends. People's obviously willingness to pay for charging, so they may be there for a long time if they need to.
And so, but it's our intent, like with the City Hall chargers, because of the pricing scheme, that we do not necessarily want people using it as their source of charging. It's meant more for folks visiting City Hall.
Yeah.
Except of course, does that apply to the workforce? They are also charged the parking fee?
Yeah, right now it's just one. We have the ability to program different pricing, but right now it's just one for all users. And yeah, there's nothing preventing someone if they needed to charge overnight being there. It's just that that's not going to be the most cost effective. And so, they're probably looking for other options. Again, that's why, I think it's a good question, because as we look at expanding that accessible, reliable, convenient charging, accessible has to do with the price too. And so we have to make sure that there's good kind of lower cost charging options.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder about the paid, to think of like who's using the charger, and for what reason. And I would think if you're paying for the charge, I would think it's because you need the charge, because otherwise, you're charging you're at your home base, wherever that may be, especially if the cost is higher because of the parking fee over the long term.
Yeah, otherwise our charging, our per kilowatt charge here is fairly low, because it's just break even with our cost of electricity. And as a commercial customer, we have a lower cost than actually even at home charging for most folks.
Oh,
So,
I see. Okay.
yeah.
But do we put money aside to pay for that $13,000 replacement of the charger? We don't just break even on electrical charges, I hope. There's a cost of
For
capital.
maintenance. Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
maintenance
that's,
and capital.
Installation.
yeah, that was
installation,
paid out of
everything
through
else.
facilities. Yeah. So we do have, and I think, this is a good line of questioning, because we'll need to be budgeting going forward for, additional chargers for the maintenance and replacement costs, right? So we have a good number of chargers right now. Our facilities team, does a great job of managing it, and has said it's actually fairly easy. There hasn't been a lot of maintenance issues or problems with them. But going forward, as we look at scaling up that charging infrastructure, we will need to be proactively budgeting for it in a way that I don't know that we have done in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it would be good too for us to consider, long-term, the pricing of it, building a more sustainable model in. So we're, that's the main thing with all that. It's like we're in this phase, right, where we've been in for some years, this ramp-up phase, and getting the charge out there. I installed chargers, and the commercial property at my business, and we let people charge for free because it's all part of the, like, get EV adoption, like this is a new thing. But as we move into the future, everyone
Gonna
pays for
pay for
gas.
everybody's right.
Yes, and so we got to get, like, it's almost like we got to get, and it's got to make sense, right, for people to install these chargers, and it's going to depend on the use. Employers may install them because it's a benefit to their employees, and they see that intangible, like getting people to come into the office. I can see Shorenstein, like, hey, free charging or discounted charging or whatever as a kind of an extra add-on. Great. Businesses may do it because it's a nice incentive. Anecdotally, I see people, they come and they plug in. Do they have to? Probably not, but they do it because why not? They get a special parking space and it's a fun thing to do. But I also see people who come and park overnight. And that is not how they're supposed to use it. And so we have to talk to those people and say, this is not your free at-home charging in our parking lot, and that's tough. So the need is out there. Like, people are looking for a place, because clearly they have nowhere else to go. No one's doing that out of convenience. They're having to leave their car and then hoof it home, and then they hoof it back the next day to retrieve the car, like, completely inconvenient. I doubt they're doing it to save on the electric bill. I think it's because of but for people, because of the cost of installing these, I mean, it seems like it's got to make good, and on a private business, it's got to make some kind of good business sense. Like, someone's got to be either they're making money off of the charger. I know Albertsons put in those large ones. I think they make money off the ads that play on them. I mean, it's got to make some kind of business sense. I just don't see private entities, subsidizing the installation. I mean, to a large degree, too. We're not talking like a couple $100. I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars, just because they feel like it's a nice thing to do. There's going to have, and on the residential side, well, they might say, well, it's a great way. And I was kind of curious on that data too. Like, of the new construction, how many chargers are they installing? Not just having ready, but installing because they know that the market demands it. I mean, residents are coming like, I'm not going to live here unless you have EV chargers. I have an EV and I need a way to charge it. And would be curious to know, is it just like they put a couple of them in and find that's fine, or are they like, no, I mean, we're already going above and beyond the code requirements because that's what the market in this community requires because of the higher utilization of EVs or whatnot. And I could see multifamily installing them and bearing that cost as a benefit because they're not going to get down the road tenants unless they have a place for the tenants to charge the car. One of my worries in this and thinking about what's like the public benefit is that in the end, there's always a group, and it does tend to be lower income renters and multifamily that get the short end of the stick. It's easy for us, I mean, at home, this is not what it costs at home to install a level 2 charger. It cost like $300. You get an electrician to come out, they're done in an hour, and you're good to go. So it's not costing even $1,000. Very cheap, and they're done in an hour. But in multifamily, especially lower cost, the folks we have been reaching out to who have been very resistant to working with us and installing chargers, I worry that eventually, as the laws change and as people are moving towards plug-in hybrids and electric vehicles, and all of a sudden folks have to look for a place, it's not just an option. I mean, they're having to look for a place to charge. Someone's going to come along and find a way to take advantage of that. And they're not going to get the Councilor Corrigan and Mayor Buck deal where they paid $300 for the friendly electrician to hook up the thing in the house. They're going to somehow end up, bearing an additional cost that others don't. And so what can we do, to help that kind of process along? Because we're, as a community, that would be, that's my concern. I'm not worried about us. The majority of single-family homeowners, as they get EV, it's very simple to install a charger at home. It is and I'm not necessarily worried about people in the higher income or the higher cost multifamilies where it seems like they are already installing and have access to EV charging. It's going to be the others who we are seeing are very resistant to partnering with us to install, and how will our constituents, our residents, have access to charging.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. Absolutely. It's, and that's where the role of the city comes in is to help direct those investments or help make it easier or more possible for people to put in charging where the market isn't currently meeting that need, right? Where because this charging infrastructure is expensive, where private companies are voluntarily installing it, right? There is that business case for it. There are cases like with the chargers at Bank of America where those were installed and are owned and operated by Electrify America. Bank of America just let them use the site. And so that is one model, but they're priced, in a way that they can recoup those costs, right? And I think they probably had some federal funding at the time to install it. So where the site is owning and operating it, we need some kind of intervention to support that. And so that's where, again, these range of strategies, that education about the state and PGE incentives that are available, that can be up to almost $6,000 per charger of rebates from PGE and the state for multifamily charging and public charging. So, a lot of entities may just not be aware of that, how much that can offset their costs. Again, it's a rebate, so there's that barrier as well. But even just starting with that education can be impactful. But there may be an ability for the city to, provide incentives or other ways facilitate that investment where it's not otherwise going to go, as you pointed out.
Well, and just one more, thank you for that. All great points. And then we'll go to Councilor Afghan. He's waiting patiently. I think where should the city be putting its time? I say that's where the city, looking at not the places where it's just nice to do, but people otherwise have access to charging. It's great what we've done at city facilities. That's important because it's part of our sustainability and climate action plan. It's important to have charging available at these public properties. But as we go beyond that, it should be where for not just because again, I think the private side companies, good connecting them with resources like Shorenstein, but that's not where I feel like the city really needs to be spending time just helping businesses to put in chargers for their employees or for others who it's a convenience. They could do it at home. It should maybe be more spent on our residents here who wouldn't otherwise have access. And it's tricky. I mean, there's no easy answers there. Councilor Afghan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have some questions for you. I think a couple months ago, I was reading an article about federal government having money for the cities to upgrade their infrastructures, but the cities aren't stepping up to get the grants and the fundings. Have you heard of that program, and have we considered going after some of this money?
Yeah, there's a number of different federal programs. So I don't know the particular one the article was on, but they're one of the federal grant programs that provides money for cities for charging infrastructure is only restricted. It's restricted to rural areas and then lower income areas, so we're not qualified for that one. But we did apply with a cohort of other cities led by Tualatin for the charging and fueling infrastructure grants, which was a less restrictive pot of funds for charging. We weren't successful in the first round, but I just got a note from that group this week that they may reapply. So yes, I've been tracking it and trying to find those opportunities where we are eligible. And so we'll be hopefully pursuing that again, and hopefully can have, we'll be successful this time. I think the best option is the state rebates right now. The city is eligible, state and PGE rebates that I mentioned, so we're eligible every time we install a charger, at least while those programs are still active. We can get anywhere from $750 to $6,000 per port in rebates. That's kind of the best opportunity for us right now.
It's a good percentage. Okay, and that's for level 2?
Yep, for level 2.
Okay. When we say city facilities, are parks considered city facilities?
Yeah, that was my broad definition.
Yes,
so
yes.
Parks, fire stations, that sort of thing, where there's parking structures, yeah.
Okay. When I was reading the enabling and installing, the wayfinding, I don't know what the return on investment is going to be. And honestly, I don't know how much money we're talking about these signs, and are the people who are going to charge their cars, they're usually no more than a decade old, so they do have the technology to go where they need to go. So I'm going to leave that with you. That's what was going through my mind. I definitely agree with Mr. Mayor that apartments, not condos, apartments are the facilities that need our help. And I don't know how to go about helping them because condos have the right to charge act and they can deal with it. But apartments, when we have rentals, those have their hands tied off somehow. So that would be the area that I would want to put in focus. When I read the enable, educate, and install and all of your recommendation, I think we can do all of them because they're parts and pieces with different organization within the city, and it's not all with one organization because like code requirement is with this and enabling is with the other one. So I think we can do that. And I truly believe we have the opportunity to eliminate a problem in the future because this technology is coming. Cars are coming, electric cars are coming, and we can sit here 10 years from now and say, wow, we had the opportunity and we missed it. Mm. And everything that you're recommending here it makes sense to me. Some of them make a little impact, some of them make big impacts. And what I was thinking was, we have these beautiful parks, and people use them in the wintertime also. And you were talking about point of interest. I know that I go to the grocery store on this side of town. Now I'm going to that side of town because they have fast chargers. So while I'm doing my grocery shopping, my car is getting charged, and I can do that in 30 minutes. So we can enable people, but we have to talk about the budget, and if they're about, let's call it $30,000, we can get 10 or 15 or 12 of level 2 chargers than just one level 3 charger. And imagine if you're going to the parks and spending an hour there or 2 hours there, you get your car charged, we get people out of their houses and go enjoy these beautiful parks that we have. So what I'm thinking is, how do we turn these recommendations to action items? So 6 months from now, we look back and say, yes, we did this, we did this, we did this. It's part of I challenge and tease my colleagues because we said we're combating the climate change. Combat means you put your armors on and you combat, you go to war. And this is an opportunity we have to do that. So I'm all for it. And some of them I don't think we have to allow, like allow residences to extend the charging cord from house to the curb. We're not regulating that. If they want to do that right now, they can. So I know Mr. Mayor is going, but I know my daughter who lives in a condo has an electric car, and she comes over to our house and she plugs it in because it's more convenient. So I get the benefit of spending time with her, but how can we enable this for our residences, enabling them to use our beautiful parks? And maybe in the future, we won't have parking meters. Maybe we have charging meters that not only they charge their cars, but they also pay for parking. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor Afghan. Okay, Councilor Winland.
Well, I'm going to take off my combat hat. So I look at it maybe a little differently than my colleague. I'm a private market person, free market, so you know that already. I think there is a lot of, I would say, newness to the EV world, no doubt, but it has been around long enough that we're starting to see trends. We're seeing major manufacturers disintegrate. We're seeing major companies pull back on their EV strategies. We're seeing a lot of market equalization, because the market is responding. And I'm not saying that electric cars are not valuable or they shouldn't be around. I think they should be. In fact, I tried to get a electric car in my last purchase, and they were not available. So when I go to the next one, it will probably be a consideration of mine. What I don't necessarily want is the city of Lake Oswego getting into the automotive recharging business, in all honesty. Unless you're going to have equity and have gas stations at parking places. I mean, I understand your need for climate action plan goals, but I also see that we need to be looking at what's, I think, the role of city government is, I think the educating is key. I think planning and encouraging locations, figuring out where we need them, and encouraging private business to incentivize, to work with our property managers and whatever, if there's any policies that we need to change so they can get things equipped and put in quickly and efficiently, with almost like a turnkey type thing, so that we are making it easy for people to do. I love the sign idea, so that people, and then I think also there should be a number for counselors that will be available if people have anxiety on charging. So I'm just kidding. I understand the charging anxiety because there's not places to plug in, but I also understand that they're really making cars that can go 300 or 400 miles. So if you can't plan your frickin' day around going to the park and coming back.
I know, it's still a thing, though.
Oh, well, it shouldn't be if you I mean, it should be for people with
Everyone's very
gas.
anxious nowadays, Councilwoman.
Yeah, well, is it our job to make them less anxious? Because we could probably spend a lot of time on other issues that are making them anxious. I say continue to go after the grants, rebates, things like that. Unfortunately, we have to be reality that pretty much the way that they're collecting money from all of us, they're steering it towards communities that probably need it more than we do. And I'm okay with that. I mean, I wish they would do an equal, somewhat, give us some bones for giving us some incentive to install things. But I just see that there's a lot of state money that we're paying into, state taxes, also federal taxes, that are supporting this industry, and that it's not necessarily the local government with all the other priorities we have. I would say that if we asked our constituents if we should be providing public charging stations or paving roads, I would like to know that answer. I mean, let's not just have it as an isolated question, because everyone's going to say, of course, Adam. But it's at the cost of something else, because we've all learned that our budgets are pretty much.
Are you talking about city facilities? The
Well,
charging stations were already, have been part of, are you talking about beyond city facilities?
well, even, I mean, let me ask you this. Would you rather spend $2 million in new charging facilities at all of our parks? Or would you rather put $2,000 in paving or?
Well, I'm just saying we've already budgeted into the city facilities. I'm just trying to, I just want to clarify, I'm not seeing a recommendation that the city go out and install charging stations on private property. That's not how I understand this at all. We're trying to
No, in
partner people with
parks.
solutions, because
We just heard parks.
so you're talking about the current plans that we have to install charging at city facilities?
I'm saying
I just want
that
to
I'm
clarify.
not,
It's fine if you just
I'm not
don't
really
like
in
that.
support of adding a
like that.
bunch of more.
Okay, gotcha.
In
On
public.
city facilities.
On city facilities,
gotcha,
right.
gotcha.
I'm all for encouraging private industry to provide public charging stations. I'm all over that, because I don't really want to be in the business of repairing chargers or paying for them and being responsible for them, because it takes time away from our facility staff, even though maybe it's low maintenance, maybe that's the way it's going to go. But if you're adding 100 chargers that are now city-owned, we're going to have staff and maintenance and everything else to take care of all these things. And I think that should live in the, I don't think we need to start a business in the electric world. That's just my point. I think encouraging and incentivizing even, maybe through easy access to permitting and so on, to get electrical charge stations available for the public or for the private industry is great. Be private, incentivized, friendly city for private enterprises, because I think Lake Oswego would be a good target because we already have 5 times the percent of the rest of Oregon with EVs. But then when it's hard to make that argument to say, okay, 90% of the people prefer just to charge at home. So, you know, I don't know. The demand, I agree with the multifamily place. I mean, figure out how we can get a quick turn, easy place. But those are pretty big investments when you look at most people want the fast charger. And if it's $500,000 each, that's significant money. And I'm not in support of public money being put towards that. But you have my list of things that I'm fully supportive. And I think in the big picture, we are moving, and I think we're still moving forward in this. But I think we need to do it, from my perspective, with a encouragement, and not necessarily financial, but policy education encouragement. That's.
Well, Councilor Corrigan is next, then we'll come back to you. No, thank you, Councilor Windman. Councilor Corrigan.
Yeah, so to Councilor Windman's point, I mean, it will inevitably evolve into, thank you, a good business, I would think, EV charging, and they'll make money the same way gas stations do. Do you know anywhere that's happening? Are there any markets that are mature enough that we know much about, like Scandinavia or Southern California or anywhere, where we can kind of see what the future might look like as we make our plans?
That's a good point. I mean, I do know that Scandinavia, particularly Norway, is very advanced, but I have not done a deep dive on kind of the charging infrastructure there, so that's something I certainly will do. Thank you for the suggestion. I think we do know, yeah, that in terms of EV growth, U.S. and global sales are expected to grow 20% in 2024, so even despite some of the market volatility we're seeing. So I think, again, strong growth demand, but yeah, no, I have not looked into the Scandinavian model, but that's a good example. Europe generally has, I think, more advanced regulation around charging. For example, they have they require each electric vehicle has to have their own charging cord to plug into public charging, rather than where we have the cord attached to the charger here. And so it's slightly different, but I'd be interested to see what we can learn from those more advanced markets. Yeah.
Yeah. Then the next question I had was following up on the mayor's concern. And I'm wondering, do we have an inventory of those older multifamily buildings that might benefit from information outreach about the financial incentives to providing charging for their residents? Do we have any idea, like how many of those do we have around? Do we know?
No, but that's something that we would definitely need to do as a next step. Right? So we have an inventory of multifamily buildings. I did a little drive around to ground truth that public EV charging map to see how many chargers on here are at multifamily buildings, and got a handful. But yeah, I think, it sounds like council is interested in that education strategy at least. So the first step of that would really be that individual outreach, get our list of multifamily buildings and try to get a contact to ask if they have charging, right? And then identify that subset that doesn't for so we don't have that list right now, but certainly could do it. As you may probably know, it can be challenging to get the right contact at multifamily buildings. There's a building owner, there's a manager, there's sometimes another property group. And so it's basically been a staff capacity limitation, but that would be our next step, and certainly can put the resources towards doing that.
I did read the comment from Duke Castle, and he refers to an opt-in survey such as done as was done in Seattle to identify the best prospects. Are you familiar with that at all? I don't really understand what he's suggesting there.
Yeah. The city of Seattle has an advantage because they're a municipal-owned electric utility. And so they had, like PGE does here, they had a program they wanted to be able to invest in public charging infrastructure. So as the municipal utility, they said, hey, we want to install X number of chargers, put out a survey, and residents could voluntarily answer that survey and say, I'd like a charging station, near me. And so that was the opt-in survey, a great way to, to gauge interest in where the charging stations need to be. The limitation for us to do something similar, we need to be able to kind of set expectations. What are we bringing to the table? You could say we could do a survey, but say we're just trying to gauge interest, maybe to pass this along to private companies rather than the city being the one to invest, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The other thing that I'm thinking about are our new affordable housing projects. Are we providing, like, for instance, the Hacienda Habitat, are we providing this level of charging that would be useful to these people?
I don't know, actually, off the top of my head, but that's something I'll look into. It's a great question. I don't know if they are that developed in their plans yet, from what I could find online, so I'll have to check in with staff. I don't know if Mayor Buck, you're nodding. I don't know if you have more information on that, but I'll get back to you on that for sure.
Those are condos, actually, right?
Yeah, I'm in favor of everything you'd like to do. I'm a longtime electric car owner, and it's just so much better. I think the more people get familiar with it, they'll realize that. So I think that this is where we're heading. I mean, we're always going to need ICE vehicles for certain purposes, but so much of it can be done so much more inexpensively and better with electric that I think we really do need to think ahead on this.
Thank you, Councilor Corrigan. Yeah, I think there's, in regards to the subsidized secured affordable housing that's being constructed, I think there's some specific strategies there that I've heard that are more appropriate than in just traditional multifamily, and working to, there's good programs out there through some, nonprofits that work to, introduce residents to EVs and to, take just a bit of more like inclusive approach than just otherwise like plopping charging station down. It can not be received well in some cases and stuff. So anyway, I think that the groups that are our community partners on these things are doing, they are well aware of, the needs of their future residents and are working down those paths, which is good.
That's a good point. Actually, Hacienda CDC, in a different property they had in the city of Portland, they did a pilot program with Fourth to do an electric vehicle car share at one of their properties to kind of, as you said, to kind of meet the need of that specific community. And so maybe a solution like that could also work for one of these. But again, I'll look into what they have planned and get back to you on that.
You had some specific questions on some code changes that you wanted our feedback on related to there's the minimum requirement of 40% but we could do more. And then this, so I guess, going back to the question I asked, at the beginning, getting maybe some more data on what these developments are doing anyway, to get a sense for, the cost of the readiness. Maybe it's no big deal, to take it to 100%. It's like, we're doing it anyway. We might as well put them in.
If they're putting the pipe,
It seems like it would
if they're
be.
putting the infrastructure, it's pretty easy.
Be good to get that feedback, right?
My question is whether PGE has if the code says that they have to bring in enough power to the site, that becomes extremely costly. I don't know if you've ever dealt with PGE, but if they have 100, say, units that comes to the site, and you're putting in plans for 200 because of all that, the upcharge can be extremely expensive.
I guess that's the incremental
Right.
installation cost. If it's kind of, I'd be curious to, I think we should seek feedback from the development community on.
Yeah, and we have the advantage that the city of Portland just passed this last year, and so we can get their feedback from their outreach to the development community, and at least as a ballpark, but certainly can get some of those numbers.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it would be, yeah, it's a wise thing to think ahead. But of course, we're existing in this area where we're having difficulty building some multi-family, we know.
Right.
Are you trying to ask a question? You're hitting the wrong button, I think. Are you trying to ask you got to hit that, yeah, you keep hitting the other.
I thought you were going to come back to me, so
But
I
you didn't have your
turned
button
it off.
yet, so out of sight, out of mind.
Mayor Buck, I don't think my colleague and I disagree. The private sector pressure will make this happen.
Right.
It's a matter of, do we want to enable it? Do we want to help our residents sooner than when the private sector is going to make this happen? You go down to California, every corner there's a charger.
Right.
So it has happened there and it will grow there. Now the question here is, when there are 3 out of the 4 councilors have electric cars, there's got to be something there. So we're going that direction, and it's not us that we're talking about.
Yeah, but you have to excuse yourself for any policymaking questions.
Every homeowner can have this charger without any problem, whether it's $300 or $2,000. But when we talk about the apartment renters, those are the people I want to enable. And short of going to their apartments and doing this for them, I'm suggesting we can do this at our parks. And if we are doing $600 million self-funding wastewater treatment, we can certainly do a $500,000 self-funding program to enable our residences have charging capabilities at our parks. So I think we need to have an educational session where we get educated on these topics and how we can enable these programs, as opposed to stand back and say, market will do that, so we're not going to do anything.
Right.
Right.
Good point. Yeah, I think you all agree. I mean,
Yeah, and I guess the other part is what do we have to have, what do we need to be charging for a charge
Sustainable
to
model.
make it sustainable, so it's a net zero? I don't mind, I don't want to make a profit off of this.
Or even right-of-way utilization by a private company. You know,
Right,
and they're running the machine
exactly.
and they're, you know.
Right, as long as somebody, I guess, I just don't think the city should be in the electrical charging business. I just don't think that's a public service that
Yeah, we hear you
is,
there.
from that standpoint. But if we can make it easy for somebody else to do, let's let them take the risk. So that if you go down to a park and somehow somebody vandalized all 10 of your stations, it's going to cost us another $50,000 or $100,000 to repair them. I mean, I don't know if the city wants to be in that risk.
Right, yeah, and there's different ownership models we can consider too, right? So that there's the city owning, installing like we do with our current charging infrastructure, but a lot of cities are using, when they're looking at expanding more public charging citywide, using a charging as a service model where essentially you're paying a fee to a company that installs, owns, and maintains that infrastructure and swaps it out as it needs upgrades and manages everything, and we just pay a monthly fee or however much of a cadence for that infrastructure to be at our site, and running as it needs to be. And so that both kind of helps reduce the risk and the, city capacity and all of this. It also helps with the it smooths that cost of the infrastructure over time too. So you're not paying a lot up front for installing it. You're just paying a fee over time. So there's some different charging model or ownership models or installation models we can look at that might be more economical too. But
I would look at it like cell towers. I mean, we've been approached by cell tower people to say, hey, can we use your plot of land because we think it's a great place to have our space so we can provide coverage. And so I'm all for that, for private industry saying, if we've got a space that's city-owned, that we could lease this space from you, and it doesn't have to be for much to, but again, you need your map first to find out where we need it. And to Councilor Afghan's point, I mean, it is the multiple, I'm all for that too. The multiple housing really is where we need it, because no one in the private house in Lake Oswego, obviously, they don't even like charging outside of their house, right?
So, okay, so to sum up, the feedback I'm hearing is that while there's some reservations about, in general, installation of charging on city property in general, there seems to be consensus that we like that, but we like also a sustainable model, for the long-term maintenance and operation of the facilities and exploring other ownership, including exploring other ownership models.
Right.
Now, so is everyone agree on maybe looking into the charging, getting the cost in multifamily before we pursue any code changes, getting feedback from City of Portland and the development community on just getting a, general, does everyone agree with that? Just exploring, well, what are they doing right now? Just to get a little more data. So I feel like just kind of,
Right.
I don't know. And then this EV, now let's talk about this charging in the right-of-way thing. I'm a little confused about this. So we have these new parking regulations that, yes, no parking regulations, okay. But, so if there's no on-site parking, so would they be just putting the parking in the right-of-way and then running chargers to it? I'm very confused by that.
So this came from staff. I think the idea here was that if there's going to be, for example, I have a photo on an earlier slide. So these two top photos were actually from the city's housing updates website. So examples of the type of denser multifamily communities that developments we might expect to see that don't actually have dedicated off-street parking, right? So the cottage cluster and then this multifamily building. So the idea would be we could consider requiring developers, if they're not providing dedicated charging on site, you have to provide a charger that's in the right of way. So say it's on a utility pole or a light pole that's right there, or just a pedestal charger for folks to park on the street. Because if people living in these houses have cars, they're going to be parking on the street anyway, right? So the idea would just be that developers have to actually install and pay for that charging infrastructure for folks that would be living here, but in the right of way. That was the idea behind it.
I see. So the spaces are there for them to park. I'm just thinking
They're
about
just
some
not
of our right of way.
dedicated.
Well,
Yeah.
I know. I mean, some that are, yeah.
Again, and right, it was a concept to consider. And
good
so you
idea,
could think
though.
about guidelines like, only where there's sufficient space in the right of way. There's just a way to kind of, make it work. But that was the idea behind it.
Well, it's a good idea. I mean, and I practically speaking, even though they could, I think we've heard from enough of the development community here that to have marketable housing in this type of suburban community, you have to have some kind of parking there. So if it's not on site and it's not available immediately adjacent to the property, I mean, they're going to have some problems,
Right, they won't-
So
yeah,
I think they're going to have one or the other. So I don't, what do you got? I mean, I think it's a nice thing to pursue. I mean, assuming it makes practical sense. It's not, I'm just thinking of gravel shoulders and
Well,
in the bushes, and what's this, you hook it up to a
PGE
tree, like, I mean.
Yeah, that's right.
Mr. Mayor, that's not going to happen because we already put some requirement in that if you develop your property, then you have to also develop the sidewalk. So there won't be gravels, there will be concrete sidewalk with a beautiful charger.
Yes.
Is PGE aggressively pursuing the pull-down?
I mean, I read their transportation electrification plan, and they have plans for, several hundred. The issue for what we're trying to do here in LO is that they're prioritizing them for lower income communities, but you'll see the bottom right on the screen here, that's PGE's pole mounted charger pilot in Southeast Portland. That's what it looks like. And so they are building this out elsewhere. It's a solution we could consider in Lake Oswego. We need to look at the capacity of our poles. We were initially approached by PGE a couple years ago, and they didn't find any poles that basically that would serve multifamily communities and that had the capacity. But it's something we could consider pursuing. We just wouldn't have the PGE funding for it, essentially. There's some other newer charging technologies that are looking at kind of other ways to have this like lower, cheaper, modular type charging. So the middle picture there is another type of pole-mounted charging that Seattle is installing, to Councilor Corrigan's question earlier. And the one in the right fits on a light pole. It uses excess charging or excess electrical capacity from when city lights were transitioned to LEDs, so there's excess, and so you can just add a charging station and get low-level charging there. So there's a lot of innovations that are coming out in this space. Even in the last year, I think people have been sending me like, hey, have you seen this? There's more and more. So yeah, this is something we can consider to evaluate, and yeah.
And if you would put something in like this, is it a universal adapter so that it would charge any car?
Yeah, the idea is that it would be compatible with all electric vehicles. Yeah, they're moving. There's kind of two main adapters right now. There's the Tesla model, and there's the other one. I can't remember the letters and numbers, but they're kind of moving all in the same direction. Are going to be compatible. I think that. I'm not an EV driver, disclosure, because I don't have charging at home or reliable charging at work. So I don't know this for sure, but my understanding is that as a EV owner, you often will have an adapter too. So yeah, exactly. So you can charge at multiple places. Yep, exactly. Right. So, and we may see that turn into one charging standard in the coming years too. Yeah.
Okay, this is great. Thank you. And so a Sustainability Advisory Board worked diligently on this. We also did a great job, and we really appreciate LOSN's in your report, their offer to help do the outreach. It's great leveraging some community partnerships here to reach out to the communities, because this is a lot of on-the-ground work that's needed to pursue this work. But we appreciate the work that you're doing, pursuing this. The signage, all the things that they've suggested have been great and are just kind of, helping us adapt and think ahead while we're working. It's an, interesting space with the private market and just making sure we have our own sustainable model, and a lot of it's for our own city employees too. It's being leaders of the community, but also, leaders of this organization, and making sure we have infrastructure here for the workforce, so they can have, reliable charging at work, And I also want to recognize Ms. Watson for we approved on the consent agenda the disposal grant from Metro for $10,000, and she wrote and was successful in that grant, so thank you very much for that.
Happy to help.
Good job.
All right, thank you for the feedback.
Thank you.
Mayor, may I clarify just one question for my benefit? For some of the information you want additional data on, do you want that prior to it going to the Planning Commission, or would you like that as part of the Planning Commission's work?
Maybe prior. Maybe we could do a check-in. Yeah, so they don't spend a lot of,
I think we need
to
give Planning Commission clear direction,
Yes,
and I don't think we're quite there yet.
if that works, yeah.
That's helpful, yeah. I can come back to with some potential, options for what funding could look like, right? So as we're going into the budget, talking about city facilities too, so we can have kind of a more in-depth conversation about what that might look like too.
Are there any, that's what I was going to ask, are there any grants for the municipality?
Not grants, other than there's this charging and fueling infrastructure federal grant that I mentioned that we applied for as a group of cities with Tualatin and others, and so that made us more competitive because we were part of a larger group. Weren't successful the first round, but we got notes that we were highly competitive, and actually no projects in Oregon were selected. So again, I think it's likely that group will reapply. I'm just not 100% sure it will happen. They're kind of taking a look at it. That's the only grant opportunity right now that's available, although, keeping our eyes open at all times. Otherwise, it's rebates. So
nothing from the Infrastructure Act, all this charging.
No, the other grant.
Where is that money going to?
Well, so actually, so one of them was that competitive grant for charging infrastructure in rural areas and low-income areas. There's also a lot of grants for fast charging along highways. So Oregon is getting over $65 million to install fast chargers along interstates and major highways. And so, directly benefiting Oswego will be, the I-5 is already compliant, but I-205, there'll be some more fast charging hubs. So a lot of the money has gone to states for building out that.
The electric highway.
Which helps with the longer road trips, but
that's true.
But we really have to look at that, meeting the gap within communities. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Okay. Information from council. You want me to talk about boards? Well, okay, boards and commissions. So this past week, We all conducted interviews for our for boards and commissions for next year. Thank you, first of all, for everyone for the time. I especially want to thank Quinn in the city manager's office for his coordination of all of that. It's a big feat, putting all those pieces together, coordinating all of us, coordinating all of the community members who participate in the interviews. Also want to thank all of our neighbors who were on the interview panels with us, both current members of the boards and commissions, our DEI advisory board member members who took part in that as well, and then of course all of the people who applied and stepped forward, submitted their applications, and went through this process. We had just incredible response for boards and commissions this year. And of course, everyone is a fabulous applicant, which makes it extremely difficult in our community with everyone way overqualified. So, but it was really, really good process. We'll be, as we're going through that, making the selections, we'll be approving them later this month. Yeah, next meeting, right? Next meeting.
We have to before July 1st.
So, yeah, big thank you to everyone in the community. Just a huge thank you for everyone's interest in continuing to serve, a lot of new people stepping forward. And I was pleasantly surprised at just the wide range of folks from young to working age to retired. And then we had a record number of students who applied to serve as student members of the advisory boards as well. Typically, we only receive enough, and we just were overwhelmed by the response we got. And that's separate from folks who serve on YAC, serve on the Library Teen Advisory Board, and who serve on Youth Leadership Council. Separate application process there, and I've heard there's even more applicants. So it's just, we keep thinking of new things for the students so we can engage as many as possible, because like the adults, in fact, they're probably even more qualified. The kids at ours. Want to give a shout out to we had our first Pride celebration on Sunday. It was fabulous. Councilor Corrigan came to the flag raising, which took place at the end of the big celebration. But the big celebration in Millennium Park, great. It was raining, but it was still just an amazing turnout. I thought, oh my gosh, who's going to come? Atmospheric river, but it was great. I mean, so many people turned out, and it was an awesome show. And that's thanks to LO for Love. They put the whole thing on. They did all the fundraising. They got money from the city, but also money from the business community, and they really put on a good show. I was very impressed, really impressed. Lots of vendors there, local businesses, the library. It was just great all around. And then update regional things. I was sitting on at a metro table. I was one of two mayors around this metro table around supportive housing services and the future of that program, the tax. The question is, do they extend the program? The program's set to sunset, but not for like 6 years. So they're like, do we want to extend it, and do we want to go out and ask the voters to extend it now? And then do we set a new sunset or no sunset? Just remove the sunset, and then what about the tax rate? I have been advocating as part of that. I mean, the program is needed. But it's still at that stage where they're setting the programs up, and there's no real sense of how much consistent funding is needed region-wide to carry the programs on, into the future. Like, they just don't know, right? They haven't. This is the program for which there's a big, large pile of money that may be allocated, the counties say, but has not been programmed yet. So it's just hard to say at this point. Does the region need $300 million a year, $400 million? No one knows. No one knows. So I'm myself am hesitant to go and ask the voters, well, hey, let's reapprove this tax for which we don't exactly know how much we need. And so far, the narrative on it has been we're collecting too much because there's just a large pot of money that is sitting unspent at this time. So I'm a little unclear why they feel like now is the time. Again, the program is not expiring tomorrow. It's not expiring tomorrow. There's elections all the time. They could put this on any number of ballots. And the Metro Council have made clear they have not made any decisions, and there was a very large stakeholder group all giving input. But my personal input, was as this program goes forward. I mean, honestly, we've had a good relationship with Clackamas County. We got a good amount of money. Other cities in Clackamas, this is not how it's working in Washington County or Multnomah County. So that's been successful. But cities really want to make sure that these programs that we are receiving, there's funds coming to all the local jurisdictions to really meet all the individualized needs. And I've learned through this program too that there's no one size fits all. Like, our needs here in Lake Oswego and then just in Clackamas County in general are way different from the needs in like central Portland and parts of Washington County. Every single community is just a little different. So having this one size fits all, it's really, it's a challenge. And so there's, the other piece of all of that is looking to expand the scope of the program so that more of the money or some of the money could be used, because right now none of it can be used for actual housing. And I know that like there's like us, we would love to have more money to do housing. I mean, that's kind of what we could use money for here. I mean, like we could use money for housing. So that was a big part of the discussion, you know, and there was two sides to that too. Because again, the needs are just so different. So there's
So
some
you
things
can't
like
use the money for housing?
No. Programs. But a lot of like, for instance, in the Mercy Green Bay, they are using SHS funds. None went into the project, but they're using them to fund the services that will be available at the site. So that's very common, which is why the program has to continue, because many, the services are in housing. And so if the funding goes away, that's a big problem, you know? So there's some level of funding that's needed in the long term. The question is how much. And then in the meantime, we still have this kind of excess funds. And how could we really put that to good use to meet some of these the needs around housing? So anyway, it was a good conversation to be a part of. No, there's a housing bond that, you know, that we've taken advantage of as well, but supportive housing services.
That's part of the metro tax?
That's the tax.
The 1%? Did not have anything for housing?
No. Services.
No, it sure didn't.
Supportive housing services.
I'm a fairly informed voter.
No. Well, it seems like, so there was a lot of support for that though, expanding and letting it be. If we say, if Washington County doesn't want to spend the money, fine. But if Clackamas County and the jurisdictions within it decide that that would be a good way that they can, then let them do it, you know, while still retaining the original intent of the measure and serving those populations. But this would be more the collections above and beyond what, you know, the voters were told they would collect. Because it's quite a bit above and beyond. You know, I was strongly advocating for that because I think it could be put to good use while not compromising the services. I think that was the fear. It's like, well, it's going to go to housing. Now we're not going to be providing the needed services. And I don't think anyone was for that. It's like, no, provide the needed services, but got this pile that we can't. That's why Clackamas County was very smart. They came and they said, hey, I mean, do you guys have ideas on how to spend the money? We're like, well, of course, you know, so we have some going into behavioral health, some going to, you know, food security. It's great. But it would also be great for additional housing, because right now that well is dried up, you know. That's it. Then we have upcoming, actually next week, C4, the Clackamas Coordinating Committee, we have our annual retreat. We're going to go talk about all things Clackamas County, but specifically economic development within the county. You know, there's been a lot of talk about lands, employment lands, like what when we talk about like job creation in Clackamas County, like what kind of jobs are we talking about? You know, Washington County, they have the tech jobs, they got money from the CHIPS Act, and I think maybe there's a little, you know, like, well, we should have gotten some. It's like, well, we just don't do any of that here. So I mean, we don't have to do what Washington County does. You know, what's our Clackamas County thing? So it should be an interesting discussion on, you know, how we're growing in Clackamas County and what do we want to be? What's our thing out here?
When we grow up.
Besides being, you know, the best county and the most stable county sometimes. What are we going to be known for? That's all I got.
Appreciate the opportunity to serve as acting city manager, and thank you for the productive meeting tonight.
Phelan. All right.
Was it longer than you thought it would be?
Yes.
Doing a great job.
Well, see, it's because of your
That's great,
leadership.
though.
It's your leadership
Good job.
that we
No
are fully
complaints.
engaged.
That's great.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. We're adjourned. Good job. Great meeting, everyone. Great meeting.
Running.
Thank you.